Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky all up in your podcast. It's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for pressing play. Joining us this week is I love all my guests that come on. Anybody that takes the time to come on and just have a fun talk with me, I'm always super excited. There are some people I get especially excited about, and this is one of them. Our guest this week is Toby Hadoke, and he is, ironically enough, we're not talking really about Doctor Who this week, but he is the walking, talking expert on not only Doctor Who info and minutia and trivia, but in loving Doctor. I don't know anybody that loves Doctor Who more than Toby Hadoke. And you absolutely love Doctor Who. I'll plug your Patreon real quick and give you a chance to plug it as well. Go to Patreon. It'll also be on the show notes at shaneplays.com for this episode. Search for Toby Hadoke, Toby Hadoke on Patreon. And if you're into Doctor Who at all, you have to listen to Toby's stuff on Patreon. It is a great, if you're familiar with the great courses, I think like on Audible or whatever, it's the great courses in Doctor Who presented by Toby Hadoke. And it is purposefully positive. There is a lot of negativity out there in any given fandom, and Doctor Who is no exception, but Toby goes out of his way to keep it positive. We're actually going to be talking today, and then I'll give Toby a chance to introduce himself further. We're going to be talking today about a piece of very important science fiction called the Quatermass Experiment. I always want to put an R and call it the Quatermass Experiment, but it's not. It's the Quatermass Experiment without an R. And Toby is also has deep love for that and is expert on that and has written a book about it. So, and links to all that will be in the show notes at shaneplays.com. We're going to have a fun chat here in a second, but I wanted Toby to introduce himself to you further. So, Toby, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do? You do a lot of different things, and they're all fun.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, Shane, and thanks for asking me to be on. Yes, I mean, another way of saying it is that I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. In my real job is that how I've earned my living really for the past 25 years is as a stand-up comedian on the live circuit. I'm a regular MC at a couple of comedy clubs, and I've played all the big ones, and I've headlined the Comedy Store. So I've eked out a living doing that, living out of a bag. But also I'm an actor, done a lot of theatre and bits of television, lots and lots of radio. I do voiceovers, but I have this hobby that got out of hand, which is loving Doctor Who. And I've been fortunate enough that many years ago, I did a one-man show. I combined my two major things, being a stand-up and Doctor Who, and I did a one-man show about my love for Doctor Who. But with the guidance of a very good director, it was more about how we didn't have any jokes that were exclusively for Doctor Who fans. It was about how Doctor Who impacted on my life. And so a lot of people came expecting to have something, essentially very, very geeky, but it was more of a sort of coming of age thing. And it was designed so that people who'd never seen Doctor Who could still find it accessible. And just because of the timing of that, it was a year after Doctor Who had come back, in 2005, and it got more successful than any of us could have imagined. The timing of that was great, that it got a lot of attention, and it brought me to the attention of a lot of the people that do the Doctor Who stuff via the BBC. So it gave me an extra branch to my career where I got to do my hobby as part of this weird mosaic of a career that I have. So so I became a sort of professional anorak in a way.
And I wanted to tag on to that. You said that, it's been important to your life. A lot of times when you're talking on, on your Patreon, and I think that later goes out to the general public,
yes.
Right? Yeah. It's just accessible earlier on Patreon. You'll often reference major life points that you've had to what was going on in Doctor Who at that time, and he's like, oh yeah, this episode here. And by the way, this is what I was going through in my life right now. So, it's like, they're like woven together for you.
Yeah, and that hadn't been the original plan, if I'm honest, Shane. But it was to my surprise. Well, I mean, a lot of stand-up is autobiographical, and if you're doing a one-man show where you have to do an hour, there has to be a sort of narrative thread. It can't just be an extended 20-minute club set, So that was sort of bred from necessity. But I thought I was telling my story, and there's a sort of hero's journey in the sense that my dad left when I was 4, which was a major upheaval, and Doctor Who filled the gap, and my show sort of charted that, and then culminated with Doctor Who coming back when I was a parent, and I watched Doctor Who with my kids. So there's a sort of narrative arc that again, that wasn't the story I'd intended to tell, but as I previewed it and rewrote it, and we had eyes on it, and that seemed to be the story to tell, and that seemed to be the bit that people reacted to the most. And then I found that, and I didn't really know any Doctor Who fans apart from a couple of mates, but people kept writing to me or coming up to me and saying, I identified with your story. Not necessarily that it had exactly the same moments, but it had the same beats, i.e. Doctor Who was there for me at a difficult time, or Doctor Who has been a constant in my life, and everybody's life has ups and downs. I can remember what story was on when my granddad died, or whatever. That's a commonality that a lot of Doctor Who fans sort of share, and that hadn't occurred to me that would be the case. So I found I was unintentionally providing identification for people who'd maybe, because most, what it's like, Shane, most depictions of geek culture up until relatively, have always been rather pejorative, and local news stories will, do the people who dress up and still live with their mum, and it's always done slightly snarkily. Whereas mine was a sort of unabashed, look, I'm not perfect by any means, and I am a bit of a mess when it comes to sports and tidiness and all of those sorts of things. But this is what I'm good. This is what I do, and this is what I love. And you can't fake that zeal either. That helped the show as well. That it wasn't an act. It was all true. And I think that communicated to people totally unintentionally. And so that's informed what I've done ever since. Where I've gone, well, I think people like to say, if I'm watching The Keeper of Traken and I go, oh, I remember where I was when this was on. Other people might go, yeah, well, that wasn't me with Keeper of Traken, but that's what the Sea Devils was like for me. And so it gives you a commonality, even if the timelines aren't the same or whatever, because we probably, most of us, have gone through, those of us that are, fans as opposed to casual viewers, probably all have moments that have been special to us, or also hugely disappointing at the time. One of the things about being a Doctor Who fan, of course, is being hugely disappointed with something in 1985, and then in 2025 looking back and going, why did I have such a problem with that? It's absolutely fine. And that is sort of part of life's journey as well,
I love that something you said is like, that's not the story I intended to write. That's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look, anybody, if they're being honest, they're like, this wasn't the story I intended to write, but here we are.
What's that famous phrase? Life is what happens when you're making other plans.
Right, when you're making other plans, exactly. So, hey, quick note before we really get going. This episode is mainly about the Quatermass Experiment, which is one of the first BBC sci-fi TV shows and very foundational to other sci-fi and horror that came later, as you'll hear during the discussion. However, Toby is also a massive Doctor Who fan, and when I say massive, that doesn't even cover it. So we spend some time talking about Doctor Who as well and some other things. The main Quatermass Experiment discussion, if that's what you're here for, starts around 40 minutes in. And I also want to mention that one of the reasons I invited Toby on, not only because I wanted to learn about the Quatermass Experiment, which is fascinating, not only for the story it tells, but also its place in sci-fi and horror and television history. But Toby has also written a book about the Quatermass Experiment. And I invited him on because I wanted to talk about the Quatermass Experiment, but I also wanted to get word out about his book. And the book discussion doesn't really come up till about an hour and a half in. So if you're interested in the book, that discussion, it probably should have brought it up earlier in the episode, and just through the natural flow I didn't. I want to make sure that people know that he has a book. You can go to the show notes at shaneplays.com for a direct link to the book. So just wanted to point that out. But anyway, this is a great episode. Glad you're here. And I'm going to stop yapping in this audio footnote now so we can get to the podcast again. Thanks so much for listening. Yeah, I mean, Doctor Who, it's hard. It's hard for... Okay, so I want to back up a little bit and mention, you were talking about it filled in the gaps when you were younger. It's hard for Americans. A few of us get it, but most of us don't get how deeply like Doctor Who is in the fabric of pop culture in the United Kingdom. Like we get it, like especially 20 years ago when Rose aired, a lot of Americans jumped into to Doctor Who that had never really watched it before. So they know it's big, but they don't get the, back into the 60s and all that and how it's, like you would play, Doctor Who on the playground in school and stuff like, and that's not an American experience. Maybe it is now since 2005. But you had Dalek Mania, you had all this other stuff going on. It was in your comic books, you had all these Doctor Who comic strips and stuff. And it wasn't like that here. So it's been interesting to hear how important Doctor Who was to you,
Well, and also, people who don't watch and know Doctor Who would still know what a Dalek was. They would still know if you played the TARDIS sound and showed them a police box, that would it's almost like a race memory, really, within various. And I think it's probably something that will be impossible to replicate in this day and age, where the cultural landscape is so fractured and people sort of cultivate their own areas now. This is a time when there were 3 television channels. And so, even if you didn't watch something that was on, you couldn't sort of escape it. And it was also lampooned in sketch shows or its stars were on chat shows. And because it ran for so long, it was multi-generational. So you'd watch it with your parents and they'd go, it's not as good as it was when I was a kid. I used to hide behind the sofa. So it's sort of
behind the sofa.
Yeah, which I don't know if anybody ever actually did, but
right. I haven't, like, we know, that I've learned that is a, doing a lot of Doctor Who behind the scenes, because I devour every special feature and this and that I can get my hands on. Behind the sofa is kind of a phrase in the UK that evokes watching something scary on TV as a kid, right? So people talk about behind. In fact, they're like a series of fan shows called Behind the Sofa or something like that, where they get together and talk about Doctor Who. I could be wrong.
On the Blu-rays, there's a thing called Behind the Sofa where we actually sit on the sofa and watch Doctor Who. But I think Behind the Sofa is specifically something. It's one of those things. It's like when there's a disaster and the same jokes pop up, but seemingly all at the same time all over the country without there being a specific writer on. Behind the Sofa seems to have been a phrase adopted to describe how people watch, particularly Doctor Who. It's a particularly Doctor Who phrase that seems to just be, again, part of our cultural lifeblood but without actual, which is so evocative, of course. It suggests we were kids and we were scared and we were behind the sofa. But I don't think I've actually met anyone who did literally watch it from behind the sofa. So
right, from behind the sofa, right?
Because the sofa's usually against the wall. You can't get behind the sofa.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But it's also it kind of just shows that Doctor Who is, being a kid's show, being a family show, it's always had little scary moments in it, which I think has made the show better, Yes. Anyway, all right. So getting back to who you are as a performer and how you make earn your living, I did want to mention here, it looks like, are you still every Tuesday at the XS Malarkey Comedy Club?
Yes, we will be celebrating is it 27? What year is it? I think 27 or 28 years this September. I think we're celebrating 28 years this September. No, maybe it's 27, but it's a long time. Every Tuesday, I've emceed it pretty much every week. And that started a bit like Doctor Who. It was supposed to be a short run, and it seems to have gone on forever. We've had our ups and downs. We've had to change venue a few times. But it's and it's it's not a big stag do's hen do's office parties kind of show. It's a little shambolic idiosyncratic thing that nonetheless really good acts come and play because they know that the audience are there for the comedy and are invested in the night and want it to work. So good acts know that they'll get a good reception there, and also we give a chance to up and coming acts who are just finding their voices. So it's a nice little Tuesday night zone of sort of fun and it's not. I mean, experimentation is perhaps probably too arch a word because everybody knows what they're doing. They're established comics who know what they're doing. But you can, I think, they can afford to be a little bit more. They don't have to kowtow to perhaps. Audience expectation in the sense that they can enjoy themselves and let their material breathe in a way that sometimes on a Friday and Saturday night, just the very nature of the night dictates that you have to be high octane, full on, and not indulge yourself in any whimsy. I think acts find the texture in their sets when they come and play excess because they're accepted for what they're doing and the audience trust them and let them breathe a little bit. So it's a really nice, it's a lovely show to do. I'm blessed that every Tuesday night I know I'm going to an audience who are there for the right reasons and who let me get away with murder because I've been there every week. So they kind of know me, it's probably a little too indulgent of me sometimes. But no, it's great to do. And it serves a good purpose because we don't charge very much money. We run on a non-profit making basis in order to make it accessible to everybody. But on the understanding that this is I can deal with hecklers. I've done Friday and Saturday nights for the past 20 years. I've dealt with big groups. I just don't want to. I just don't think that's very interesting. So, if you want to call somebody a fat git or, yell names at them, go and do that on a Friday and Saturday night. On Tuesday night, just come. We're providing the comedy. You don't need to bring anything to it. We can happily deal with it, but we just don't want to.
So that's every Tuesday at XS Malarkey Comedy Club in Manchester.
Yeah.
Now this is from your website, so if you need to update anything, let me know. Every last Sunday of the month, you're at Testing, which is at 53.2.
Yeah, that's the same venue as XS Malarkey now. And yeah, I used to do a new material night at the Comedy Store, but there's no Comedy Store now in Manchester, sadly. So after a bit of a hiatus, 53.2, which is this brilliant community venue, has no independent funding. He does it all himself. And it's the only fully accessible theatre venue in the whole of Manchester, even though he has to pay for all of that himself. But he's mindful of things that perhaps bigger organisations somehow manage to overlook. And so I do a new material night the last Sunday of the month where I get really established acts, people like Sarah Millican, Gary Delaney, Joe Lycett, some top acts who again know that they will get a chance to run out their new stuff and actually have it get a proper assessment from the audience and feel it in their mouths and not have to do any of that annoying audience control stuff. So, I mean, I'm flabbergasted sometimes with the acts I get, but they're always very grateful. They say it's very useful for them to have it as a place to practice their stuff. And again, that can be quite loose and messy, and that's a nice thing to have. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is called testing, so people know what they're getting into, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think so. All right. So that's a regular thing you're doing. You do a lot of Blu-ray special features for Doctor Who. In fact, I mentioned this before we started recording. As far as I know, you're the only, I feel like if I say celebrity that you'll poo-poo me. You're the only personality that I know. I mean, I'll call you celebrity, but I know based on what I know of you, you're probably going to go, what, who?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't count myself as that.
So, personality that people may know, that I got to know through special features. You kept showing up in all of these features. And I think of you as I celebrate you, and I know that the fandom does. But if that label feels uncomfortable for you, that to totally understand. But I got to know you through all your special features and your documentaries. You're the first person I can ever think of And I'm like, I recognize this person from special features.
Well, it's a very niche thing, which is well, I have no issue with being called a celebrity. I just don't think it's true, but I don't have an
Right.
issue with it. I'm very flattered, and I'm always rather humbled by the kindness, because you know what it's like, and you know what the internet is like for feedback when people can be mean and stuff.
Oh my goodness!
And I have people like yourself who contact me and say very nice things, and it's very flattering. And also, my partner is a proper celebrity, so in our house she definitely wins.
So, do you want to give her a shout out? You don't have to.
She's an actress called Shirley Houston, who has been a regular in Coronation Street, which is one of the biggest shows over here, and she's been in it for about 15 years. And she's also been awarded an MBE by the Queen for her services to charity and disability and all sorts of things. So she's the power behind the throne.
Now, I lived in England in the 90s for a couple of years. How does Coronation Street? I know Coronation Street. I've heard of it, but when it comes to like online, like TV shows, long running, how does it compare to EastEnders? Like, which one is bigger?
Well, Coronation Street has been running nearly twice as long as EastEnders. I mean, Coronation Street is older than Doctor Who. Coronation Street started in 1960, 61, something like that. So it's been running longer than Doctor Who.
So it's a flagship. It's like the flagship.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sort of north-south divide a little bit. Coronation Street is Manchester, so it's north of England. EastEnders is London, so it's south of England. So there's a bit of that. I'm from the Midlands, but we didn't really watch Corrie as a house when I was younger, which worked out well because for a while Doctor Who was put on opposite Coronation Street, and that essentially was the final nail in its coffin. So I sort of grew up being very angry with Coronation Street, but now I'm rather grateful to it.
Yeah, right.
Just goes to show how fickle we can be. But that's very much part of the fabric. But again, soaps are not the force that they once were. Those shows used to get 15, 16 million, and now they get 4 or 5 because of the way that the cultural landscape is fractured. But it's still a big deal, I think, to be in a show like that. And she's the longest running sort of disabled, because she's disabled herself. So the representation is very important, and it gives her a good platform to do the awareness that she tries to raise. So it's important stuff, and they're important shows. Again, part of the televisual furniture. But yeah, it means doing Doctor Who, which you were asking me about, the Doctor Who Blu-ray things. I mean, I think I came to their attention because of the one-man show. In fact, I know I did. Somebody contacted me out of the blue and said, "Do you want to go for a drink? I saw your show. I really liked it." He turned out to work out he worked on the DVD range, as it was then. It was DVDs in those days. And we were talking about some of the commentaries, and I was saying how I was a bit disappointed that certain people hadn't been on certain ones. And he said, "Oh, I think they thought they'd died." And I went, "Oh, come on, that's basic research." I got a quick... and he said, "Oh, well, would you like to be involved?" And I was, absolutely. And so they asked me to sort of moderate a commentary where I sit with the actors and gave them some ideas of who they should hire. And we did those, and those went well. And I thought, well, a bit like the comedy club, maybe I'll get a few weeks work out of this, and this will be nice. And we're still doing them on the Blu-rays. So that just escalated,
Well, there's a lot of love in them, because you can tell when somebody phones something in, and you can tell when all the people involved are trying to be extra creative and make it better. And, and like adding that little extra 10% of love and polish. I see it in the stuff that you produce and help put together. So, we were just talking before I started, you got one with like little chumblies running around, and there's always something kind of I don't know, nice about them, like that didn't have to be done.
Well, we do definitely get the extra mile, and sometimes it gets my goat a little bit when we're reviewed as if we're a television program, because the shows that we make for these Blu-rays have literally less than a tenth of the budget of even your cheapest piece of tap television program. So the fact that they're as good as they are, now I don't take much credit for that, because in terms of the way that they look, that's directors like Chris Chapman and Paul Vanezis and Ed Stradling and the people that make the shows. They go the extra mile. I go the extra mile. I could just turn up and do what I'm hired to do on the day, but because I always behave as if I would like the program to be what I would like to see as a punter. So I'll go, well, we should get that actor, or I know where that actor, and I'm quite useful to them because I'm so interested in particularly the sort of supporting actors or the floor managers, the sort of perhaps the less headline grabbing characters who might not have been interviewed before, so therefore have more interesting stories. I tend to know where those people are, so I'm able to facilitate an introduction. So that means you're not having to pay a researcher or a runner. The crews are so small on these things, but we all, I've been freelance pretty much all my life, and my pet hate is when you then work with somebody who's on a salary who is really lazy, and you're like, you're getting paid all the time for this, and I'm struggling to get an email out of you. And we're all, as freelancers, we go the extra mile. That they're fueled by love, these things, but I don't see the point in doing a job if you're not going to do it properly. But that means that we definitely go above and beyond what we're hired to do. Before we started recording, we were talking about a documentary we made on a story called The Savages. Well, I would blush if I told you what the budget for that was, and the amount of days work I did on that, and the documentary is longer than the story, and I had to persuade a mate to be in it who did it for an eye-wateringly low fee, but when and the director, he wasn't taking advantage of us because he put more time into it than anybody else, and the beautiful graphics and everything and all the archive content he got together himself, because his day job is working in the BBC in Newsnight, which is a big news program, so he had access to the archive, so he was able to spend time when he'd finished his day job doing that. So it's as a result of all of those things that you get something that looks absolutely incredible, and it's probably been worked harder on than something that's broadcast at 9:30 with a load of people on salary, but it's also because we love the show,
Right, it shows. Yeah, it definitely. So I have to ask, there was one where you were you spent a couple of days with the actor that played Benton.
Oh, John Levine.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's one moment where he's actually, I think he's making you and his mom like either breakfast or lunch. Whose idea was that? He's like, let me cook you breakfast. Or, how does that kind of stuff happen?
Well, that was, the genesis of that extra, if you is unbelievable. But I'm going to tell you, and I promise you every word of this is true. When I was touring my one-man show, Doctor Who seemed to pop up all the time. So I was on the road doing this one-man show called Moss Ate My Doctor Who Scarf. I toured it for about 2 or 3 years and was always doing one-night stands here, there, and everywhere. And I remember once sitting on the train and I was watching a Doctor Who DVD on my laptop, and the DVD was out, and the bloke sitting opposite me said, "Oh, Doctor Who, yes, I've got the Crystal of Kronos," which is a prop from a John Pertwee story called The Time Monster. And I curse myself now for not getting his name and address. I'd love to know where the Crystal of Kronos is, but this sort of stuff just seemed to happen all the time. I seem to be a weird sort of Doctor Who magnet. I quite often bump into people on trains, or I'll get talking to somebody and it will turn out their uncle was in Doctor Who, or so. I don't know. It's on my radar. I'm primed to pick it up. And anyway, I was on this train. I was very Doctor Who'd up. I think I'd been doing my show, and somebody threw a bag of Haribo jelly sweets onto my table. And I looked up and he said they didn't have any jelly babies. So I'm like, okay, he's doing a Doctor Who reference. And I said, oh, thanks very much. And he said, I'd just like to say, I like all the stuff that you do. And I said, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. I like sweets. Lovely. What a lovely gesture. And he said, do you know what? He said, do you know John Levine, who plays Sergeant Benton? I said, yeah, of course I do. He's quite a character. He said, yeah, I think you should do something with him because he's such a character. You should do a kind of, Louis Theroux. I don't know if he mentioned Louis Theroux, but he said you should do a kind of fly on the wall with him because he's such a character. And and this doesn't reflect well on me, I thought, well, I'll text this idea to Chris, the producer. So I texted Chris and said, look, this idea, blah, blah, blah. And I sort of showed him, went, look, I've got access to the DVD people, so I've texted your idea. And while that train journey was still going on, I got a message from Chris back saying, I've pitched it to Dan Hall. Who was the head, who was in charge at the time. He thinks that's a great idea. And so I was again able to show that to the guy. And that was then commissioned. And then we went and did it. But then the sort of tenor of that program was dictated by Chris, the producer, who he lent me the Louis Theroux documentaries and said, it should be this kind of thing. I think I probably lent into that a little bit too much, and we've made subsequent shows of that kind where I've spent a weekend with a Doctor Who character where I've been more myself, and I think it's been. I look back on that one now. I mean, I don't watch it. I find it difficult to revisit anything I've done. But my feeling is that one I perhaps tried a little bit too hard. But John is such a character that it doesn't really matter because he provides most of the entertainment himself. But
that's one of the things I wondered watching, and I'm like, is he turning it up a little bit?
No, that's John.
Or is that how he is?
John has no filter. And he phones me now every 6 weeks or so. We have a chat, and I say a chat.
Nice.
Quite often, it's a 40-minute monologue from John. But he is a character, and he can sometimes, and he'll say so himself. He sometimes overcompensates for his own nervousness and gets himself into hot water because he'll say something daft. But he hasn't got a malicious bone in his body, but his mouth sometimes works a lot quicker than his brain. and I would say that to him, and he would accept it. He is a character, John, and that's so. And because he's such a character, I think that was why it was deemed worth giving that.
Oh, he's nuts in a good way. I don't mean that as bad at all. He's a total fun. I mean, just. He's always on.
Absolutely. And it was an attempt to try and get behind the man who's always on as well. And I don't think we ever quite did. But also bear in mind, because we got a bit of stick for that one, I remember in Doctor Who magazine. And I was a bit upset because at that time, every single Doctor Who documentary was people doing talking heads in front of a green screen. And we were going, well, when this range has been going for 10 years now, let's try and do something a little bit different, and we did it with good intentions. We knew John would be entertaining, but we weren't setting him up. We were never in on anything that he wasn't in on. So it wasn't candid camera or anything like that. And it was an attempt to not just do. Because if you look at most DVD extras, they're often electronic press kits or, a few people, at a press conference or, as I say, talking heads in front of a green screen. And we had ambition to try and do something a little bit different. And as I say, we've done subsequent examples of those. I lived with Matthew Waterhouse for a weekend, who played Adric. And I've just done another one that's coming out on a box set that's coming up, where we try and get people who are real characters and try and break through what we know of them from DVD extras and conventions and see what they're like in real life, as it were.
I mean, I loved the one that you did with John. I loved it. Yeah, he was a total character. Great. I was like, wow, and now I have a different appreciation for him when he pops up in because I like the unit era. Yeah. I like, Benton and the Brig and all that. And so now when I see him pop up, I'm like that, I have a whole different appreciation for him, so he's not, he's not just a character that was on a sci-fi show for a couple of years. No. I mean, I have an idea of who he was or who he even still is. And that was one thing, I know how TV works, right? Especially, it sounds like the BBC used to just be like, you might not find your contract wasn't getting renewed till that day. God, yeah. Like, hey, we're not going to need you anymore. And I get what the Tom Baker era was trying to do, and it was successful. The Tom Baker era of Doctor Who was extremely successful, but one of the things they did was pretty much jettison unit and those characters and actors, and I always kind of hated that because I liked all that stuff. But
And I think John blames Tom Baker for that, and he's wrong to do so. It was nothing to do with Tom Baker; it was to do with the producer. But you try persuading John of that, because I failed.
Yeah, have fun. Yeah, no, he is. And I don't mean this as a backhanded compliment. I mean, he's a very strong personality, and in a very fun, like he was like just stopping and chatting with people as y'all are walking around and having like these great conversations with them.
Chatting
anyway,
to ladies and things like that. Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm thinking about. Yeah. He's like, when you're, So, anyway, I know the main thrust of this episode is the Quatermass Experiment. So I want to move us on. Because it definitely, like, with your love of Doctor Who and everything, I mean, I could literally go 8 hours on that, and I don't want to do that. I want to let the Quatermass Experiment shine, and then if you're up for it, we can do another more Doctor Who related episode down the road.
Yeah, sure.
But in the meantime, if that never materializes, see, like the TARDIS materialize. Anyway, if that never materializes, folks, go to Toby Hadoke's Patreon. There is more goodness, Doctor Who goodness there than you can shake a sonic screwdriver at. So go check it all out. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about what you're up to, Doctor Who, any of that before we kind of move over?
No, I suppose the only caveat to the goodness is that I'm not cloyingly rose tinted. And I'm not actually naturally a very optimistic person, but the reason I try and keep it positive with Doctor Who is simply because there's so much negativity out there, and it's so easy to do. And I was an angry fan. I was an angry teenager. My most of my time spent liking Doctor Who was getting cross with it. And I wrote a couple of books with Rob Shearman, the writer of the episode Dalek, who very kindly asked me to write some books with him, where.
Such a good episode.
Oh yeah, he's brilliant, Rob. Yeah,
what a way to introduce Dalek to new viewers.
Phenomenal.
The new people coming along when we restarted in 2005 who have no idea. Maybe they've seen a Dalek toy or something. No idea what the Daleks. That was
Perfect.
Such a good episode to introduce the Daleks.
And Rob was one of the first Doctor Who people to sort of speak to me as an equal. I did an event with him, and he was so kind to me, and we used to meet up for a drink. And he said, "Why?" And we had one session where we just went through the Pertwee era and rated it to each other. And he said, "Why don't we do this as a book where we do watch the whole series in order and go back and forth, but," he said, "we have to be positive," because he said everything out there is so toxic. And he said that's part of the fun. So even if the episode's terrible, we have to contort ourselves to be positive about it. And I found that really rewarding, especially because I do, I think like a lot of us, I find, happiness is sometimes elusive, and my diving into Doctor Who is a way of escaping from a world that sometimes is quite difficult to contemplate. Right. So if one is adding to the conversation, I think it's quite nice to be sticking stuff that's positive out there. And I started doing my podcasts during COVID, and I found a lot of people saying, "God, everything's horrible at the moment," and I really like tuning into your podcast because it's a ray of sunshine. So it's not unctuous or sentimental, but it is trying to see the best in the world. And so I do sometimes have to acknowledge that it might be a bit of a struggle. And I never lie,
Well, you're not Pollyanna about it. I mean, I don't want people to think that it's. And by when I say Doctor Who goodness, I don't mean that it's like all sweet and nice. Like I'm saying, like the phrase geeky goodness. There's a lot of meaty good stuff in here. Come dig in, you know.
And I think I like to appreciate the work that's gone into something, even if it's failed.
Well, and that's what I love. I mean, one of the things I love, I'm sort of fascinated with the way that the BBC used to produce material. Like they had that almost like assembly line, like they would set up a studio, knock it down, and repaint it all within like 24 hours, and it was down. I mean, it's fascinating.
Cultural factory, yeah.
It was fascinating how it used to get done. And there's a documentary on one of the Doctor Who Blu-rays. I can't remember which one it is. It's not a Doctor Who documentary, although a little bit of Doctor Who's in it, where this reporter spent 24 hours at BBC Center showing what happens in 24 hours. Absolutely fascinating. The military precision that was going on. They could have shown, like, I was in the U.S. Air Force for 9 years. They could have taught the military a lot about precision. Yeah. I was amazed at how they used to make TV in the BBC. And a lot of it would broadcast once and gone forever. All that effort and just gone. So, fascinating. But anyway, do check out Toby's. Anyway, the point I was making was that you have a lot of insight into how they used to make the TV. And I love that part of it, as well as all your insights into Doctor Who. And I mean, what Toby will do is he'll turn on an episode of Doctor Who and then just start talking. He'll start just ruminating and thinking out loud and pointing out stuff. And there'll be somebody pops on the screen for 3 seconds and he'll be like, oh, that's so-and-so who was also in in these other episodes of Doctor Who, and who was also, and I met them, and I mean, he just minutia trivia, and I don't mean that lightly. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. No, it's great. It's great. So pop culture archaeologists in the future are going to hold you up in veneration for the amount of information, because this stuff is important. Yeah. It's not just fun. It's important. So but anyway, moving on, folks, do check out the Patreon, Toby Hadoke. Search for Toby Hadoke. I'm sure it'll pop up, and it's Hadoke. Or go to the show notes for this episode at shaneplays.com. Let's talk about, so I have done this a little bit different than I do most episodes. Yeah. Normally, I research a topic upside down to make sure that I have witty, intelligent things to say about it. But what I want to do, because you're such a huge fan of the Quatermass Experiment, you're an expert on it. We're both geeks who love sci-fi, right? I love BBC Sci-Fi. You obviously love BBC Sci-Fi. So what I want you to do is tell me what's cool about the Quatermass. All I know about the Quatermass Experiment is that it was important British sci-fi from the 50s. And that I've purposefully not gone any deeper than that. I know that there was a TV series and then a couple of movies and then like a TV series remake, I think like in the 70s or something, or maybe it was the 90s. I don't know. And that's all I know.
Right.
So, So what is it about the Quatermass Experiment? Because you've been a longtime fan, you've researched, you've written a book about it called The Quatermass Experiment, the making of TV's first sci-fi classic. So what is it about the Quatermass Experiment that's so cool?
Well, I mean, a number of things. It triumphs in a lot of regards. It was really the first original television science fiction broadcast in the UK. There'd been the odd play here or the odd children's serial, but and I always, a lot of the stuff that we like has cult following. Doctor Who has a cult following, Star Trek does, but Quatermass, which is how I would pronounce it, but it is often written with the R, so researching it is often quite difficult. I had an epiphany light bulb moment where I typed it in spelt wrong, and I actually brought up more newspaper articles under Quatermass than I did under Quatermass. Yeah. And the name is the name comes from the titular character, the Professor Bernard Quatermass from the British Experimental Rocket.
Okay, I have to stop you there. Is that why you named your dog Bernard?
I may have snuck it in there without my partner knowing. We wanted a sort of old man's name, and we went for Eric and Dennis and various things, and nobody could quite agree. And then one of my children said, Bernard, what about Bernard? And I'd been wanting to say that, but I knew if I said it, they'd say no. So when my child said it, and I went, oh, I agree, I kind of snuck it in. So it had been my plan. Yeah. I was very manipulative. Yeah.
Your nefarious plans.
Yeah. But I also have a lot of favourite actors called Bernard as well. Bernard Kay, Bernard Horsfall, Bernard Archard. So a lot of my favourite actors are called Bernard too. It's Bernard is a very sort of avuncular name, and it suits a dog, I think. But yeah, Bernard Quatermass is a professor, and he is the creation of a writer called Nigel Neale, who is hugely influential. He influenced science fiction over here, but he also influenced science fiction over the pond. John Carpenter's a big fan. Joe Dante is. You'll find influences from the writings of Nigel Neale in all serious science fiction that has come since, really. He was, but ironically, he was somebody that didn't consider himself a science fiction writer and didn't like science fiction. He hated B movies. He wanted to write stuff that was about character. And he also is very clever in what he does is he tells science fiction stories, but he uses the language and methodology of horror. So Quatermass is science fiction, but it is also very tense and very scary. And a lot of it is done through suggestion. And it's all embedded in the real world. They're all set in the present day. But they also feature elements of sort of primal fears and primal threats. So, you tend not to get talking aliens in Quatermass. The aliens are unimaginable intelligences. Quatermass never really talks to the aliens. They're either long dead and their influence is being brought to bear on us in different ways, or they're an intelligence, an uncorporeal thing that is ephemeral rather than something you can communicate with.
Is it to the level of like Lovecraft with his cosmic horror, or is it something a little short of that?
It's something a little short because its ambition is more to tell very human stories. So, and there are 3 Quatermass serials in the 1950s. The first one is the Quatermass Experiment, in which a rocket goes up into space with 3 men in it. The story starts, the rocket has returned, overdue, and when they open it up, only one of the astronauts is there. But the doors haven't been opened, and the other 2 men's spacesuits are still there, inside, linked, as they would have been had they been worn, but empty. And the astronaut that has survived is behaving very strangely, and he seems to have had some sort of physical changes. And you'd probably think, if you've seen many, many sci-fi stories, he's been infected by an alien and he's turning into an alien. Well, kind of, but it's more than that, because it turns out he's actually an amalgam of all 3 men who were disseminated out in space by this sort of plankton of the ether that, to understand, sort of disseminated them and then reassembled them with itself inside in order to acclimatize to our Earth. So there's always very plausible science in the science fiction, but also the sort of the body horror and the existential horror of the idea of humanity and the soul being kind of corrupted or lost. And so you have this astronaut figure who's quite a stricken fellow who still has vestiges of his humanity within him. And in fact, that in the end, as he mutates and grows into this giant sprawling vegetable thing, it's the latent humanity within him that Quatermass appeals to that saves the day. But it was hugely impactful because the 6 episodes of the Quatermass Experiment were broadcast live. You'd say you enjoy how the BBC used to make things. They were broadcast live from Alexandra Palace. They went out live. The cameras were really heavy. The cameraman saw the image upside down. You changed focus by actually clunking the lens round. They were really heavy. The technology was very primitive, but they were directed by an Austrian emigre called Rudolf Cartier, who'd worked in films in Austria and then in Germany. So he had a cinematic sensibility that he brought to this fledgling medium. Television drama was very young in 1953, but also it was a changing time in the UK. Rationing had just come to an end. There was a bit of optimism because they were coming out of the austerity and the destruction of World War II, and Britain was being rebuilt. And so Nigel Neale, the writer, went, well, sod all this optimism. I'm going to bring a note of dire consequences about all this new science. But also the Queen had just been crowned in Westminster Abbey, and the climax of the Quatermass Experiment takes place in Westminster Abbey, and that's where the monster manifests itself. So he's got his eye on current events as well. So most people watching their first original TV drama, because a lot of TV drama at that time was plays put on the screen, theatrical things.
So this was original, not an adaptation.
No, this was 100% original. And he was still writing episode 6 when episode 1 went out live. I mean, it was seat of the
that blows me away. Yeah, it blows the amount of logistics. And like you're talking about the engineering, the cameramen have to. Yeah,
it's
the problems that they used to solve are
absolutely
mind-boggling.
And on the fly, And in fact, in the final episode, I mean, a beautiful thing happens because most of the people who had televisions at that time had got their televisions in order to watch the coronation, which took place in June, I think, and Quatermass is on in July and August. So maybe it was a couple of months before. Quatermass was on in July and August, so maybe the coronation was May, but a matter of weeks. And most people who had televisions had got them to watch the coronation, so they'd seen Westminster Abbey on their telly, and they'd seen the Queen there, the head of state. And this is different times. This is the 1950s, when there's a certain deference for important buildings and heads of states and all of those sorts of things. So to then have Westminster Abbey on telly, and within the drama, it's a live television broadcast. They're doing a live television broadcast from Westminster Abbey, and this alien monstrosity appears. And so it's meta before we even knew what such a thing was, because the people at home are watching a fictional television broadcast of a place where they've recently seen an actual television broadcast live into their homes. This is live, but it's fictional. And then to add to that, during episode 6, when somebody's just said, when I think they've just done an appeal, or they're just about to do an appeal to the television viewers in the fiction to say, that monster you saw, it could be the end of the world, we've all got to pray, sort of thing. There was a technical fault. One of the microphones broke down, and they had to put up a thing saying normal service will be resumed as soon as possible. So but that was real. So that happened in the drama, but it also, of course, added to the drama and helped the drama. So, extraordinary stuff. And it had a huge, huge impact. So it wasn't cult, it wasn't comic books. And in fact, he deliberately has scenes in it where he takes the mickey out of comic books and B movies, because it was
mainstream.
It was mainstream.
Right? It was targeted at the mainstream.
It's even billed as a thriller. It's called A Thriller in 6 Parts by Nigel Neale. So it's quite police procedural in many ways. But he has a scene where they take refuge in a cinema and they watch a terrible American B movie, and that's quite. I mean, he had a sly sense of humor, and that's really sort of sophisticated spoofery. Again, for 1953, when you don't think they were really doing that sort of thing, but he was very ahead of his time. Nigel Neale is the writer. He was a genius.
Nigel Neale. Yeah. So, now did you watch the original? I'm trying to do some. No, you wouldn't have, because we were.
No, I mean,
no, you definitely didn't watch the original.
I wasn't. That was
before your time. Yeah,
years,
that was before your time.
The way Quatermass entered my life was that I'm the youngest of 4, and obviously I have parents. And my, doctor, we had various books around the house, books of monsters and things like this. So there was the odd one that had a mention of Quatermass. Quatermass was always spoken of in hallowed terms. So, I like Doctor Who, the kiddies program. If they wanted to be mean to me, they'd say, Doctor Who's for kids. And they say, but Quatermass, now that's for grown-ups. That's proper. So it was always spoken of with a certain reverence. And even people's parents and grandparents went, oh God, I watched Quatermass, and not so much from behind the sofa as, and it did actually go out with a warning. It had a BBC announcer at the front of it saying, before we begin episode 4 of the Quatermass Experiment, we would like to warn viewers that in our opinion, it is not suitable for children or for those of you who may have a nervous disposition. They actually said
Which, of course, gravitated kids towards the screen.
Well, and in fact, they did actually do a press release in between, I think, episodes 5 and 6, saying to parents, look, you should not be letting your children watch this, which is quite extraordinary.
Now, did the BBC have a rating that, any kind of, because now they'll at least, they'll put up like this show has, language, violence, nudity or whatever. I mean, did they have anything?
No, they were sort of learning as they went, and I think because of the feedback that it had, and because they'd heard that kids were watching it, they sort of put this edict out because I think they were quite surprised that parents were letting their kids watch it, so they had to do that public service broadcasting thing of saying, well, it's not really for young Johnny, So it was definitely the sort of thing that. So my mum had remembered watching it when she was born in 1943. She remembers the 3rd serial, Quatermass in the Pit, which is 58, 50. I think she watched the repeat, so 1960. So she'd have watched it when she was, late teens. And it was a sort of thing that even people who didn't like science fiction sort of went, oh no, Quatermass is, that was war. So I already had respect for it before I'd even seen it. And then the 3rd serial, the most famous one, Quatermass in the Pit, was brought out in edited form on VHS. And a friend of mine lent it to me, and I'd heard of it. But by then, I'd watched a lot of old Doctor Who that I'd imagined had been amazing because I'd read the books, and then you watch it and it's a bit clunky and a bit dated, and your imagination is always going to create better pictures than they could at the BBC in the 1960s. However, Quatermass and the Pit exceeded my expectations because it was higher budget than Doctor Who. It was a premiere drama, so its production values were amazing, but also the imagination on show. It's a really sophisticated piece of television. That's the third one and the most famous, and it's a synthesis of sci-fi and horror, and it postulates that mankind is actually the product of tinkering 5 million years ago by Mars. Mars is dying out, and so
that's pretty bold for 1950s. Really bold. That's kind of a common, not super common, but it's a reoccurring theme in sci-fi now that, we're designed by or tinkered with.
But then it was very sophisticated, and he also ties in with it black magic. Because the Martians are insects and they look like gargoyles. So all of the sort of dark side of our religion and our sort of spoken word myths and legends and horned beasts are all race memory of the Martian creatures that influenced us 5 million years ago and colonized us by proxy. But then, so he's talking about ancient forces, but he also ties it in with the race riots that had been going on in the country, the nuclear arms stalemates, and it's a treatise on why humanity is so bent on destroying itself, and it's because insects, which the Martians are, cleanse the hives. They rid it of mutations. They are racially pure in a way, in order to propagate their species. And so he ties that in with Nazism and Aryan supremacy and the idea of a super race. So the science is good, the horror is good, but the science fiction ideas synthesize those things and make a really potent brew. It's really breathtakingly good stuff. If you're used to watching old telly, you'll go into it going, okay, yeah, I pretty much know what to expect here because I've seen a lot of old telly, and I defy you not to have your breath taken away by actually how sophisticated it is in terms of storytelling. And it's also got good characters, and it's well played, and they're really good, and it's a really good production. It's a really fine production.
Now, would you say that the quality applies to all three serials?
Yes. I mean, but I would always advise people to go in with the third one simply because it's a gateway drug, if you like, because you watch television evolve in front of your eyes if you watch Quatermass. Also, sadly, only the first 2 episodes of the first one exist, and you'll love this. It's because they used to capture the pictures. Television was not recorded in those days, but this was they tried with this, but the way that they did it was they pointed a camera in front of a monitor to capture the pictures. So the 2 episodes we have aren't great quality, but it was them experimenting with how to preserve things for posterity to perhaps sell them abroad. And during the broadcast of episode 2, a fly landed on the monitor. And you can see that to this day. The fly still exists.
Did that bug you?
Well,
sorry.
I mean, it really does, because it meant that they decided not to record the remaining 4 episodes. So, unlike
because of the fly,
and there was some interference. If a car drove past, it would interfere with the electronics, so the picture turns negative. It basically didn't pass. It's not in time. We've not got a definitive answer, but I've dug into this quite a lot, and I think it basically it didn't fit the technical standards they were hoping for, which kiboshed a sale they were hoping to do to Canada. So they didn't bother recording the rest of it. Thank God they did hang on to the first 2, so we have those. But the later 4 episodes we don't have. But then Quatermass.
Is there even any audio, or is it just nothing?
No, it went out once and was gone. There weren't even any photos. There were only about 20 photos from the whole production until I managed to find a whole stash that are exclusive in my book that have never been seen before.
Oh, nice.
Including pictures of characters that we didn't have photos of, unfortunately.
So how did you can you share how you found that? Is that something?
Yeah, I dug through some archives, and I decided to look in a box that wasn't properly labeled, and then I traced where the negatives, so I'd got some prints, and then I tried to work out who would own the negatives, if any did exist, and lucked out and was allowed to use them.
So did you feel like that you've found King Solomon's mine?
I felt the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Because I didn't think, and having found some, I found these prints which probably doubled the amount of photos we had, and that was enough. I was really happy with that. And then those negatives turned out to have more, so I've exceeded my expectations twice.
See, I feel like that there's a lot of stuff out there. Now, some stuff's just gone. I mean, but it's hard for us to understand now, but back in the day, especially in the 50s, early days of Doctor Who, the first few Doctors, especially the first and second, the BBC and whoever else, they treated TV as incredibly disposable.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of the stuff we have is because people recorded audio on their own, or you had a guy doing telesnaps, taking pictures of the TV and stuff like that. But I still think when you're talking about like behind the scenes pictures or, scripts, whatever, ephemera that are fascinating to historians and collectors, it's out there. It's just mislabeled somewhere. And the received wisdom is people say, oh, there's none of it left. But if people like you go poking around, there's still a few treasure troves out there to be found, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm amazed with what I did find, because that's, I mean, this book I've written has taken me 30 odd years, but actually if it hadn't taken that long, it wouldn't have half the stuff that it has in it, some of which I found only very, very recently. So, perseverance, luck, and I mean, annoyingly, there are no pictures from the final episode, so there are still gaps. But then again, the gaps and the tantalizing what ifs are also part of the appeal.
Right, the mystique.
Stuff. Yeah, but so what happens is they have that one, which was primitive. It was broadcast from Alexandra Palace, which was the BBC's first sort of drama studios. But then they moved to Lime Grove Studios when they do Quatermass 2, which is only 2 years later. But 2 years later, they have a massive amount of location filming at a factory. And factories in those days were quite, because again, we have to remember, television was new. People weren't used to seeing things that weren't in their field of vision. So something like a big factory was quite an exciting thing to send a film crew to. And that is Quatermass 2, which is quite B-movie. It's quite Invasion of the Body Snatchers-y, but with some added dimensions. But that posits the idea that the alien invasion actually was successfully completed a year ago, and we're in deep trouble. So again, it's sort of slightly subverting the genre before it's even established itself. So you have the increased location filming, but actually the way that has been captured is quite primitive. It's not really very good quality. It's only got a limited number of lines in the telerecording, so it's not brilliant quality. And it's the least well known, really, Quatermass 2, because the last episode is slightly disappointing. And then 3 years later, they do Quatermass in the Pit, where they've come back and they have this. It's the conclusion of the trilogy, although there's no continuity really. Apart from Quatermass, there's only really one character who appears in the first one and the third one, and they're never played by the same actor twice. Quatermass is not played by the same actor twice on television, because the first Quatermass actor, Reginald Tate, died a couple of months before Quatermass 2, so he's replaced by an actor called John Robinson, who nobody was really happy with, including Robinson himself. And then when they come to Quatermass in the Pit, because of the reputation that they've accrued, they go back to the actor that they offered it to first, actually, who turned them down, Andre Morel, who is, for me, the definitive really 50s Quatermass, and Quatermass in the Pit is extraordinary, and he's amazing in it. But that production, where some of it is pre-filmed at Ealing Studios in this big sort of clay pit, which is a building site where they uncover this mysterious object that they think is an unexploded bomb, but it's actually a Martian spaceship that's been there for 5 million years, and inside it are fossil ape bones that they think are Neanderthal man, and it's actually a sort of missing link. It's primitive man that the Martians have taken away to experiment on and to augment with their own Martian faculties, and then brought back to Earth in order to affect our evolution, so that we carry on the Martian traditions within us that they'll be unable to carry on because Mars is a dying world. So we are essentially the Martians, and all of our bad things are as a result of us being interfered with by insects from 5 million years ago. So it's and it ends with this sort of marauding sort of ethnic cleanse of London by people under the Martian inheritance, and footage from the actual Blitz is used to show burning London, which of course would have meant a lot to people at the time.
At this point, there's people, right, with the Blitz, right, and so which I can't. American shared memory, we don't grasp that. That would have been like to live in London and surrounding areas during World War II. That's amazing strength of spirit to come through that. But on Quatermass, you were saying at this point. So at this point, there's humans that are not Martian tainted for war, and some that are.
Yeah, some have outgrown the inheritance.
I see.
In order that you have some people to be targeted by, and those of it, and those who are subject to the Martian inheritance, it's kicked off by proximity to this object, which awakens those latent urges, but also telekinetic powers. So the people under the Martian influence kill people by hurling rocks and stones at them, with their mind. But that in turn explains ghosts and poltergeists. All spectral outbreaks are as a result of reawakening of Martian tendencies. So it ties in horror and ghost stories and black magic, but it gives them all a science fiction explanation. It's genius.
And that's very Doctor Who-y.
Yeah,
I don't mean Who-y and like that's a bunch of Who-y.
Yeah.
Doctor Who, one of the underlying, really, I don't know if it's a principle, but one of the things that happens 99.9% of the time is that things that people think of as paranormal or ghostly or supernatural have some sort of scientific basis.
Yes, definitely.
The only time I can remember that not being the case is actually one of my favorite moments in Doctor Who. I know we're talking about Quatermass, but I've got to, since we're talking about stuff having a scientific basis, it was the two-parter with David Tennant where they introduced the Ood.
Oh yes,
and they're on that planet with and the Doctor's insatiably curious. And it's the only time I can ever remember him, because there was like some kind of well to go down or something like that. And the devil was down there, or the Doctor Universe's version of the devil. And the Doctor went, nope, I'm not going. And I thought that was such a powerful moment because there are some things that even he's like, nope, I'm leaving that alone.
Yeah.
And I thought that was super powerful. That's also, if I remember right, the Doctor Who episode that introduced the annual tradition of something scary in spacesuits for a while, if I remember right.
That's right.
Horror in spacesuits. Yeah. So back to Quatermass. One of the things I wanted to ask, so Quatermass himself, the character of Quatermass, I think I was saying Quatermass, but now I've been corrected to Quatermass. Is he in the 50s, after, science, like the atomic bomb and this and that and the other, so scientists started being regarded as like people that can do anything, right? And you had this in B movies for a long time. You had this square-jawed, pipe-smoking scientist who would always save the day, knew what to do, and the woman was depending on him. And so is Quatermass a character like that? Or like, what kind of character is Quatermass?
Again, this is how ambitious Nigel Neale is in his writing, because that sort of character would have worked in this, but Quatermass has an extra dimension, because Quatermass builds the rocket that goes up into space with his friends on, and it comes back and two of them are missing and one of them's turning into an alien. Quatermass therefore embodies something very much that was a concern, I think, of perceptive people in the 1950s, and is a concern that besets us today, is of how much of scientific progress and those who seek it is trailblazing advancement of mankind, and how much of it is deadly follow meddling with forces that we are as specks on this planet incapable of understanding. And so Quatermass is a morally conflicted figure, and people who've watched, we will talk about the movies, I'm sure, the movies may think I'm talking gibberish here because the character is different and indeed American in the films. But let's confine ourselves for now to the TV serials where Quatermass began, because he is reimagined for the films for the American market. But the Quatermass, as envisaged by Nigel Neale, is somebody. So for example, the big twist of the second one, it's not the twist, it's the what the story hangs on, is that he's been trying to get government money for his moon project, which is a series of domes that will be built on the moon in order to house us in an alien environment. And then he happens upon a top secret base in the south of England that is his moon project. So basically, the aliens who've inveigled the way into the government a year ago have actually used his designs to create gestation tanks for themselves in order to take over the planet Earth. So in a way, Quatermass always slightly has a hand in the thing that brings us to the brink of destruction that he has to save us from. So unlike Doctor Who, he's not sort of steaming in to identify the problem and save the day. He's actually instigated the problem, and it's his sort of moral obligation to solve it. So he always has a slight guilt about him. And even to the extent that, it's suggested that his wife is dead. We don't know. Television was slightly different in those days. You didn't have scenes of people sitting around being sad, but there's a sort of always a sense of melancholy that hangs over him. So he's this embodiment of that eternal dilemma of, is science a force for good or evil? And he isn't quite sure which, but he is a scientist, so he has to do, he has to create things. He has to be a pioneer.
Once again, that's pretty advanced for the 50s.
It is. It's really thoughtful and
because in the 50s, science was being regarded as, it can do anything. It can solve any problem.
Nigel Neale liked sounding a cautionary note. It meant that maybe later on his writing became a little bit caustic and his sense of humour a little bit too pessimistic, and certainly in the way that he engaged with fans and aficionados. But there's a darkness to him, to his sense of humour, and he always sees the potential for things to go wrong. That means that his characters are always slightly haunted by that.
Right. Well, and I've heard I can't remember who to attribute this quote to, but it'll say a good science fiction writer can predict the car. A great science fiction writer can predict traffic jams.
Very nice.
I wish I knew who to attribute that to, but yeah, there is. I like, because science is at its basis, in a lot of ways, it's a neutral thing. How do we use it? Right.
Yeah.
It can be good and bad. It's not, and a lot of technological innovations come along are a mixed bag. They bring good things and they bring bad things.
Yeah.
So, that's really advanced for the 50s, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That may have been getting explored in, science fiction prose of the time, like short stories and novels, but you didn't see a lot of that on TV.
Well, and an important part of the jigsaw is that Nigel Neale and Rudolph Cartier, who was his producer-director, it was the same job in the 50s, the producer and director were the same person. As well as doing the 3 Quatermass serials in the 50s, they also brought to the screen George Orwell's 1984 in between the first 2 Quatermass serials. And this increased their cachet at the BBC, but was a hugely controversial production. It was a 2-hour staging of the play. Neale did the adaptation, Cartier produced it, and it starred Peter Cushing as Winston Smith and Andre Morel, the third Quatermass, as O'Brien. And it caused a lot of consternation. It had a lot of viewer feedback. It created a lot of soul searching within the BBC, but it had an unprecedented run-up time. It took them about a year to get it together. But it really put in the spotlight what the BBC should be doing, if it should be presenting this sort of stuff, if it should be doing it dispassionately. Because I think that's the other interesting thing about Quatermass is there is a kind of moral message within it, but it's not one of finger wagging or instructive or sort of thoughtful liberalism. It's a bit more dispassionate than that. A bit like Neale's Aliens are a bit dispassionate. It sort of presents stuff and says, we might not like this, but this is kind of how it is, and we've got to kind of, and you've got to kind of get your head around that. And this production of 1984 that they did was unstinting in its depiction of, you know, what goes on in Room 101 and the totalitarian regime. And it's very.
I would actually really like. I doubt there's any tapes of it, but I would.
Oh, there is. It's available on DVD on Blu-ray.
Are you kidding?
The BFI.
People listening can't see, but I'm holding up my hands together.
It's an extraordinary piece of television. Yeah,
I would love to see it. I mean, 1984 is just, it's a powerful, powerful book. And, you know, I've seen a few different adaptations, and it's really strong stuff. Have you ever seen there's a comic strip out there called Amusing Ourselves to Death, where it compares Orwell to Huxley?
No, I haven't.
It's really strong. It's a short comic strip. Really powerful.
Yeah.
And it talks about, it sounds like, I'll try to find it and send it to you, but it basically contrasts Orwell and Huxley. Orwell basically says, you know, Big Brother is going to control you through fascism, basically, right? Yeah. Through total control, you know, a boot pounding on the face of humanity forever, however it's put.
Yeah.
And Huxley said that Big Brother, or whatever poses for Big Brother in Brave New World, will control you through amusement.
Yes.
There's all these amusements out there. So the end result is the same, where we don't really have control of our society, but it's two different ways of getting there.
Well, it's interesting because Neale slightly synthesizes that, because he does examine the sort of the porn that is thrown out. This is extraordinary for 1954. The sort of soft porn that is thrown out to the proles in 1984 a bit more. He makes that a bit more prominent than you'd expect if you've read the book. That is a little bit of a slight sort of not plot, if you will, but sub theme.
It was basically like softcore porn and gambling.
Yeah.
And drinks, you know, like pubs or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. But he has a little bit of a section which he decides to set in the sort of porno rights section, which just illustrates that perhaps a bit more blatantly than the book sometimes does. But then he goes on, and in the 60s, he writes a play that if you've never seen, you must, called The Year of the Sex Olympics, which basically predicts reality television and has a society that has had so much sort of entertainment of a particular kind thrown at it that we are desensitized as a society. And, you know, an enterprising TV producer says, well, why don't we just stick a couple of people on an island with nothing and see how people react to that. But then, of course, because he's a TV guy, he throws a murderer on there as well, a psychopath on there as well, just to mix it up a bit. But at one point during the drama, there's this very passive audience, because they've been force-fed a diet of sex and gluttony and all sorts of things, that it's made them completely passive. And then a guy trying to protest against this falls to his death, and they see him die. They see an actual death. And because their emotions are so skewed by what this diet of sort of, you know, overly colourful sort of gorged indulgence, don't know how to react. So they laugh because their emotions are so skewed. It's an extraordinary. They don't know what to do. It's an amazing. It's again, Neale was a genius. The Year of the Sex Olympics. If you've never seen that, I would urge you to. It's an astonishing piece of television.
Another thing you said that kind of jumped out at me, you know, because I'm kind of fascinated with the differences in British television and American television, especially like in the 50s and 60s and, you know, 70s or whatever, before, you know, these other channels came along and people had access to more content, entertainment, whatever. The BBC being supported by taxes, they were responsive to the public in a way that American television never has been.
Oh, absolutely. So the tenor of a lot of correspondence they get is, I don't pay I don't pay my taxes to subsidize this filth.
To see this filth, right? Where American TV was all corporate. Now we did have, we had public broadcasting, PBS, which that was taxpayer funded, and that's how most people who knew of Doctor Who before the 2005 reboot, like, it would show like Doctor Who, it would show. It would show Red Dwarf, Faulty Towers, Monty Python, all that stuff. But it was such a small part of the overall TV market. People, it wasn't like people like, what are you doing? So the responsiveness, to like, wow, people are really upset about this. We need to rethink how we're doing TV. Whereas American TV was like, what can we get away with and make the most money? Right. So the difference there is very interesting to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the BBC at its best, though, has to be has to be slightly paternalistic. It has to, but this is why it should only employ the best and should be rigorous in terms of quality control. The Reithian mantra of inform, educate, and entertain should be at the forefront of everything that the BBC does. And I think it took some bold pioneers in the 50s who had pressure to not put stuff on like this, to say, look, this might be uncomfortable. 1984 might be uncomfortable.
But it's important.
But it's important. And it's not mindless. It is violent, for the time, but it is not contextless, and it has something to say, and it is an intelligent treatise on the subject that it is tackling. It is not mindless violence.
Yeah, it wasn't titillating.
And it did have to stand up for itself. Sometimes with people who wouldn't understand that, but also with people who had an agenda against it, because some people object in principle to the idea of a public service broadcaster. And I think it was one of the moments in the BBC's history where it was forthright and bold and had the courage of its convictions and had some very intelligent people, fighting its own corner.
It's actually interesting that a government organization would put something out that could be perceived as anti-government, because they felt it was important. And like I said, they weren't trying to titillate. They weren't trying to, they're like, this is an important story. So yes, I absolutely want to see that. It's, 1984 is such a powerful, but we're here to talk about Quatermass. So
it's sort of part of the oeuvre. And again, it's a 2-hour play that largely goes out live, which is extraordinary. I mean, what an achievement that those actors. There are some filmed inserts, but in the sort of bombed out Britain, the site of actually Television Centre. Television Centre hadn't been built then, so where Peter Cushing is wandering around is that bombed out part of London. But yeah, they were doing a 2-hour play in a hot television studio with 3 cameras. I think 3 cameras, maybe 4, and running from scene to scene and getting changed as they were jumping over camera cables. Extraordinary stuff.
Yeah, it's like I said, the more, a lot of people, I think the British word is, they'll say, I'm still struggling how to learn how to use the word naff. But a lot of people say the old Doctor Who is cheesy or naff or whatever, the production values. But the more I learn about the constraints they were working with, the more I'm literally blown away about with what they were able to do back then.
Yeah.
Like I appreciate it on such a different level, knowing, what they were dealing, the production timelines, the budget, all this different stuff. It never fails to impress me what they were able to pull off.
Yeah.
Really, really impressive.
And Quatermass has an advantage over Doctor Who in that Doctor Who was sort of having to tell science fiction stories on the budget of of something that normally would be set inside a building. It was having to stretch, a bit like Blake Seven had to as well. They were on very earthbound budgets, having to kind of stretch what they were doing. Whereas Quatermass, because the producer Rudolph Cartier was the most fated producer working at the BBC at that time, and also he kept demanding more money and not taking no for an answer. So they are really high end productions. Of course, they look a bit primitive in certain areas by today's standards.
Right.
But if you're used to watching 60s British television, I think you'll be quite shocked at just how high end these productions from a decade earlier are, considering what you know from what you've seen, because they pushed the envelope. Cartier had a cinematic vision. He was making television, but he had a cinematic eye, but also understood how to then make that eye work for the small screen. He wasn't putting the big screen on the small screen, but he was using a big screen sensibility. Whereas a lot of people at that time, they even called television radio with pictures. But they were, but Cartier and Neale wanted to saw television as a medium in its own right, and they had high ambitions for it. They weren't journeymen. They felt they had a responsibility to do something that wasn't being done with this medium.
So it wasn't just the first British sci-fi television. It was a landmark in other ways. With the way
they're the most important television dramas of the 1950s, irrespective of genre. Yeah,
interesting.
Full stop.
So okay. All right. So I want to, before we forget to mention, because we barely mentioned it, you have a book.
I've written a book.
You have written a book based on 30 years of love and research of Quatermass, and it is called, I have notes, Toby, right here. It's called The Quatermass Experiment, the making of TV's first sci-fi classic. There's 2 editions. There is a special edition hardback, which looks amazing, but I think it's sold out.
Yeah, that's sold out.
Do you think they'll do another? Do you think they'll do another run of that? Because it's really pretty.
I don't know. I don't think so, because it takes him. He's a the publisher is quite a small operation, and it's a lot harder for him to package those. And I'm not sure he realized. I think he's slightly annoyed with the ambition to do it. But I think the paperback he's a brilliant designer, and the paperback is a beautiful design.
The paperback looks great. Yeah, no, I'm just saying. But there was a piece of art.
Robert Hack, the famous artist, did that for us. But yes, this book. I mean, I started writing to actors from Quatermass in 1989. I don't know. I lived out in the countryside in the middle of nowhere. Everyone was doing Doctor Who. Fanzines had already tracked down actors from Doctor Who and stuff. But I thought Quatermass deserved. I mean, look, I was 16. I thought I'll write a book about Quatermass. I didn't really know what that meant, but I wrote to people, and I thought people might write back, because Quatermass was so famous, and yet nobody really. People interviewed Nigel Neale because he was the writer and he was still very well known and working, but nobody went any further than that. So I wrote to loads of the actors and the designers and the visual effects guys, and I did this over the course of 2 or 3 years. And as I learnt more and had some happy accidents and etc., and I acquired this big folder of letters, some telephoned interviews, or people recorded stuff into cassette tapes. One of the designers gave me all his design photos and photocopied his scrapbooks. So I had all of this stuff, and it was always a passion project. And I ended up doing a dissertation on it at university, so I made some use of it. But it had always been the one that got away. I'd wanted to write this Quatermass book, and I'd never quite done it. But then, as the years went on, that turned out to be an advantage that I'd never done it, because, as I said, I found more stuff. And I did have a publisher interested, and then I took so long that they folded. And then I got talking to Stuart, who runs 10 Acre Films, and we discussed it. And it was going to be a book. I was going to do 2 books, one on the 50s serials, and 2 on the films and the various later spin-offs. But in fact, I'd acquired so much material. The first book is literally about the first serial. It's just about the Quatermass Experiment. And I've been working today on the book that will be about Quatermass 2.
So it just covers the first serial,
it just covers the 1953 serial. Yeah.
Interesting. I love that even though it doesn't survive in TV form anymore, you still had enough material to write a book about it. I love that. So
that's how deep I've dived.
Yeah. So there's the 3 original TV serials. Yeah. There's a couple of movies I think they made.
What happened was each of the 3 serials was turned into a film by Hammer Films. So the first film came out before the second TV serial. It was one of the first to make that journey of being an original TV serial that was made into a film. Hammer were a British film. Hammer are now very famous, but they weren't quite so famous then.
Right.
And it sort of helped to transform Hammer's focus in a way that they did these science fiction, but they're science fiction as kind of horror. And they're directed by, the first two are directed by Val Guest. Nigel Neale didn't, because he was a BBC staff writer, he didn't have much to do with the first one, and that remained to his chagrin for the rest of his life. So by the time the film of Quatermass 2 came along, he insisted on having a greater hand in the screenplay, and he was no longer a BBC staff writer, so he had a bit more control. But he was never happy with what they did with the character of Quatermass, because Val Guest, and the way that the distribution worked is that they got Brian Donlevy, the American actor, in to play Quatermass, and instead of being this conflicted, haunted, melancholic, paradoxical, conflicted figure, he's we can't let human feelings get in the way of science, Judith. He's belligerent, he's one note. Donlevy isn't particularly good. But the films themselves are, and they're stark, black and white. They're very economical. Val Guest does good rat-tat-tat dialogue, and they're films that did impress people like John Carpenter. I've in fact interviewed John Carpenter.
A lot of. Did you really? John Carpenter.
I sent an email on the off chance, and they said yes. And Mr. Carpenter granted me half an hour of his time, and that week I interviewed John Carpenter and David Tennant on Skype.
Oh wow,
that was a good week.
I mean, that's a good week. John Carpenter, and I'm one of these people. There is I wouldn't even say it's a subgroup. There is a large amount of people, movie lovers, that hold John Carpenter in super high regard.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you were describing at the beginning about, I was like, yeah, that sounds like a John Carpenter movie. So, of course, he's got his certain directorial style, and his music, his scores and all that are amazing. But, he recently, he's gotten where, he's established. I think during COVID, he directed a movie from his couch.
Yeah, well,
yeah, he said, okay. And they had him set up video and everything. And he's like, he just directed the movie from his couch. He's like, whatever. I've been around the block. I don't know.
Well,
evidently it worked.
They Live is not unlike Quatermass 2. There's elements of Quatermass 2 and They Live that coexist. And in fact, one of his scripts, is it Prince of Darkness, is credited to Martin Quatermass.
I love Prince of Darkness.
So he's...
Well, yeah, because that's saying that the extraterrestrials influenced in Prince of Darkness.
So a lot of that is very Neale, you see. Because Nigel Neale was from the Isle of Man, which has a great oral history tradition of passing on ghost stories and stories about standing stones and what they represent in terms of ancient evil. So there's all of that stuff that the folklore of the Isle of Man is suffused into this sci-fi. And I have to say, I'm giving a very UK and TV serial fan reading of Brian Donlevy. For many people, Brian Donlevy's no-nonsense, caustic, uncompromising Quatermass is part of the appeal of the character, and particularly that appeal to the likes of Carpenter. You can see sort of R.J. MacReady in Quatermass. So some of the things that I, as an English viewer, like about the TV serials over those first two movies that are absent from the movies, their absence is actually part of the appeal for some of the great American pioneering filmmakers who took to those films and were influenced by them. So, my reading is not the only one of any value. And in fact, perhaps if Val Guest hadn't made those changes, they wouldn't have been as influential to certain American filmmakers as they were. So, I have to take that on the chin. So there's a film version of each of the 50s serials made by Hammer. But
now,
the third
do you
one,
think the Hammer did a good job with them?
Well, yeah. Apart from, as I say, I'm not wild about Brian Donlevy's Quatermass. He's only in the first two. Then there's a big gap, but until the third one. And the film of Quatermass and the Pit is a classic. And for many people, I think the film of Quatermass and the Pit is probably the best iteration of anything Quatermass. For me, you can't beat this serial. And I did come to that first, and I did spend about a year watching it almost every day. So in a way, I was always going to miss the bits that weren't there. The film of Pitt is shorter. It's in colour. They transpose it to the London Underground, which is very effective. And by now, Quatermass is played by Andrew Keir, who is very good and quite direct and quite earthy. But I think the TV serial actually benefits from being in black and white. I actually prefer the look of the production and the design of the creatures, and I prefer Morell's Quatermass as well. But I'm a child of television, so something that develops over 6 weeks and has that atmosphere and has lots of talky scenes in rooms is very much my cup of tea. But actually the film work in the TV serial is extraordinary. But I respect people who prefer the film. But either way, it's either the TV serial or the film of Pitt that people like the most. And certainly the Pitt film is closer to what Neale wanted Quatermass to be than the first two films. But I do like the first two films because they've got a stark, grainy black and whiteness to them, and they've got a lot of those 50s British character actors in them. Right. I mean, Sid James is in Quatermass too, from the Carry On films, playing a journalist, and he's absolutely phenomenal. But I mean, if you've watched any British films from the 50s, 60s and 70s, you see every single actor from all of them popping up, and that's a joy in and of itself, you know.
Right. I agree. Yeah. That doesn't, like in American TV, like 60s and 70s, the 80s, maybe a little bit, the 50s, the same actors kept popping up over and over. And that's half the fun. You go, oh, that's that guy from, right. Whatever. Yeah. I was going to ask you, do you agree? Because I like just on the Wikipedia page, and there's other resources out there for Quatermass Experiment, obviously, but I mean, they're saying that Quatermass was influential on Doctor Who, Sapphire and Steel, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Alien, Red Dwarf. I mean, would we have had those without the Quatermass Experiment?
It's hard to see that we would have done. I mean, because all of those program and filmmakers were influenced by it. They'd either seen it or it was part of the folklore, rather like the ancient stories that Nigel Neale had passed on to him that were ghost stories, rather like the Martian inheritance that's been programmed in our subconscious. Quatermass sort of lurked there, particularly if you made stuff in this country. I don't know if you're a particular fan of season 7 of Doctor Who, the first John Pertwee season, but
John Pertwee is one of my he's probably my favorite classic.
Well, there's not a story in season 7, John Pertwee's first season, that does not have a Quatermass element in it. The opening of Spearhead from Space is almost exactly the same as the opening of Quatermass 2. The shot where the poacher looks at the meteorite is exactly the same as the shot of a farmer looking at a meteorite. Quatermass 2 is Spearhead from Space. There's elements of Quatermass in the Pit in Doctor Who and the Solurians, even more in Doctor Who and the Demons. The Demons is very like Quatermass in the Pit. And Ambassadors of Death has elements of the Quatermass Experiment with the missing astronauts, but also elements of Quatermass 2 with the sort of conspiracy theory stuff going up to government level, and the whole atmosphere. I mean, they when they talked amongst themselves about what they wanted to achieve with that season of Doctor Who, they were like, "Do you remember Quatermass? We should be a bit more like that." And I can understand why Terence Dicks, who was the script editor of Doctor Who, at that time moved away from that, because he felt that, much as he liked Quatermass, he felt that it wasn't quite Doctor Who season 7 because it didn't have that slightly fantastical element. And it's hard to disagree with that, much as I like season 7 and I'm glad that it exists. But I don't think Doctor Who would have prospered had it not softened its edges and become a bit more colourful as it did in the later Pertwee era.
Right.
But I for my personal tastes, I love that season, and it is very, very Quatermass in style. But yes, no, I think I know that a lot of those filmmakers and writers, Dan O'Bannon did a film treatment for the Quatermass Experiment later on. So
did he really?
Yeah. They and in fact, I've held in my hand the copy of his script that he sent to Nigel Neale, which said, to the master Nigel Neale from Dan O'Bannon. So they paid fealty to this guy.
Did Dan O'Bannon pass away before you had a chance to talk to? Did you ever get a chance?
I
to
sadly
interact
did
with him?
not have a chance to talk to Dan O'Bannon.
He's a fascinating guy because he's involved behind the scenes on a lot of stuff that people don't realize. Like they accredit it to other people, but like he was a driving force on a lot of it, especially Alien.
Yeah.
And of course he was on Dark Star with John Carpenter and all that, but he was really super plugged into the version of Dune that Jodorowsky. In fact, he moved, I think, to like France or something to work with Jodorowsky. But if people need to go check out Dan O'Bannon,
yeah, definitely.
He's done a lot more for the movies and stuff that you like than you realize.
And Nigel Neale liked him, which was rare because Nigel Neale, he was fated by Joe Dante and John Carpenter, but they actually both found him quite difficult, and he didn't do himself any favors when he worked with Carpenter for sure. Because Nigel Neale wrote the original script for Halloween 3: Season of the Witch, but had his name removed from it.
Did he really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So he could have, they did try to bring him to Hollywood. They liked him that much, but
well, that makes sense because Halloween 3 had the standing stones in it.
Yes,
and there was that Celtic.
Funnily enough, that's the bit in it that you'd think is most Nigel Neale, but he didn't actually. Looking at
he didn't do that.
That wasn't his bit.
Okay,
but it's absolutely right. The right conclusion to reach, and it was certainly the conclusion I reached when I watched it. And then I did some delving, and actually, that wasn't his. He didn't.
How interesting. Yeah, because they took it back to like ancient, like it was Celtic or something, like Druidic worship and stuff. So that's fascinating. The Season of a Witch is a thing all of its own. That's a whole nother chapter. And
I need to do a proper deep dive into that one day because I do have some of his earlier versions. So I need to do it, but because I've been concentrating, I've started at the beginning. I've got a lot of stuff that I've only kind of glanced through as well. So as I go on,
you got a treasure trove. I love seeing how this stuff connects. I would have never thought talking about this that the Quatermass Experiment was going to connect to Season of the Witch.
Yeah, so absolutely.
And Dan O'Bannon. So that's fascinating. Anyway, tell us more about your book. I want people to know about your book. Do you happen to know, will the publisher ship to America? Because I can't currently get it through Amazon.
Well, he doesn't sell through Amazon because they take too much of a cut.
They take a huge but will he ship it?
Yeah. I think I'm afraid the shipping is quite expensive, but he doesn't make a profit on the shipping. He ships it at cost.
Sure.
But yes, I cannot speak highly enough of Stuart, the publisher. He's gone above and beyond, even in commissioning art to do an exclusive hardback, which I think gave him so much more work than he'd intended. But the way that he's laid the photographs out, the way that he's laid the pages out, the cover design that he's done, and the patience that he's had with me. Quite late in the day, I was making changes because of bits I was unhappy with or I suddenly panicked about, and he took it all in his stride. Right. And I'm the first edition, unfortunately, a few more typos than I would have liked slipped through, but it wasn't for want of him checking, me checking, and other people checking, and those things are. But it's since been reprinted and is vastly improved in that area, and I would say, and it's absolutely the book I wanted to write, and I say that as somebody that spent 36 years on it. It's exceeded my expectations.
Well, I saw the video where you came home.
Yeah.
And your wife was like, "Hey, there's a box there." And I saw the expression on your face when you opened it up and saw the books for the first time.
Yeah.
You could tell you were, I don't know, moved, touched, something.
Well, there are times I never believed it would happen, and I'm still on a WhatsApp group with some of my old university mates, and I used to bore them about it when we were 18, 19 or something, and to be able to say to them, boys, I've done it, and they were all so pleased, which is lovely as well. But the fact that it's, because when I was first thinking about it, it could have been. It could have been one of those very boring sort of listy books that has a character description of all the characters. Well, I haven't done that, but I have done quite detailed and well-researched biographies of every single actor that's credited, because that's the stuff I like and it's my book, so I've done that. But it's not sort of ephemera. It is, I've got newspaper reports. I've looked at the wider sociological context. So I think it's accessible. It's not an academic book. It's not one with lots of footnotes that's full of impenetrable sort of prose where I'm showing off all of the other books that I've read. It's not one of those. It's very much concentrated on the program, but it dives down and actually it takes a bit of time to say, well, look, we don't know the answer to this. It could be this. It could be that. This is the evidence I found. This is where we are. I think it might be that, but I'm not sure. So that's what. But I hope it's accessible. I hope it's accessible to people that have never seen Quatermass. It does give it a wider context, but without being highfalutin. It's not, as I say, it's not dense academic prose. I think it's hopefully accessible, but reverent and sensible, and it describes in quite a lot of detail how it was made, and particularly for the missing episodes, what they might have looked like, and obviously explains what happens in them as well. I think it's a fascinating journey.
So the original scripts exist, right? The original scripts, so that we at least know what the story was.
Yes, they do. But actually, one of the interesting things is that they released paperback books of the 3 Quatermass serials in the 50s by Penguin Books, but they released them as scripts, and that was the Bible of any Quatermass fan. But actually, the scripts are different. He's made them easier to read. He's jiggled them about a bit. He says in the preface, I've made these a bit more readable. Actually, if you compare them to the camera scripts, they are actually wildly different in places. So I hope that some people who think they really know their Quatermass will come in and go, oh God, the cliffhanger to episode 3 is completely different, for example.
Or do the shooting scripts still exist?
Yes. Now the shooting scripts are actually on the DVD of the serials that was released about 20 years ago, but they're a really bad photostat and they're quite indistinct. And there's a page missing from episode 6. However, when Nigel Neale's widow, Judith Kerr, who was herself famous because she wrote The Tiger Who Came to Tea and Mog the Forgetful Cat and various other really successful children's books. In fact, her fame eclipsed his ultimately, even though he was the star of the house in the 50s. So there's hope for me yet. I might eclipse my other half if I hang around long enough.
It's hard to beat 14 years on Coronation Street.
I know. But when she died, and I'd been to visit her, and she'd been very kind to me, and I went round to the house, and she let me into Nigel Neale's office, and she was great. But when she died, the family only really knew that Mark Gatiss was a big fan of Quatermass. So they invited him round and said, look, what should we do with some of this stuff? So he took with him Nigel Neale's camera scripts for the Quatermass serials. And we did a live reading of the Quatermass Experiment at Alexandra Palace a couple of years ago, with Mark Gatiss playing Quatermass, and I was in it as well. And Mark brought along for the press launch of this, he said, I've got these scripts. And he said, but I've only got episodes 1 and 4 of each one. So he handed me these folders and I looked, and I really wanted to see if the missing page from episode 6 was anywhere. And I realized that he hadn't got episodes 1 and 4. He'd got a volume that had episodes 1 to 3 and a volume that had episodes 4 to 6. And I said to him, Mark, you haven't actually looked at these, have you? And he said, no, they've been in the attic. I don't think I have. And I went, no, you've got all 6 episodes of each serial. And he, bless him, he said, well, I think I'm the wrong person to have them then, don't you? Why don't you meet me for lunch next week and we'll have a handing over ceremony? And bless him, and I'm welling up as I say it, he gave them to me. And so I possess.
Wow. Well, he knew that you were a caretaker of the, you weren't just going to turn around and sell them.
Well, and then rather beautifully, sometime after, the family were doing a final clear out, and they basically had 3 boxes of Nigel Neale paperwork and scripts and stuff, and
Wow.
said to me, do you want this? And I said, yeah, let's work out how to get it. I'll pay to get it transported down. And they said, no, you will pay for you if you look after it, we'll pay for it. So the Nigel Neale sort of script archive is currently around the corner from where I'm talking to you now. It's behind me on the shelves over there.
Wow. And that's important, not just for Quatermass, but for his standing.
Yeah.
You know, he's a highly regarded screenwriter.
And extraordinary for me that, one, that Mark was that kind. And I did actually say to him, because he said, maybe you should have them. I said, well, I was going to offer to buy them from you. And he said, no, you just, you have them, which was extraordinarily generous of him. But then that the family should say to me, will you be the guardian of this stuff, is extremely, I'm an actor, I'm a comic, I'm a lovey with an iPhone. I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher. But they, the fact that they have entrusted me with that makes me feel like, all those stuttering steps I took 30 years ago to write to people and do that stuff was not in vain, and it's very flattering to have been entrusted with that stuff. And I've also there's a Doctor Who director called Paddy Russell who was the production assistant, the floor manager she was Rudolph Cartier's assistant. When she died, she left me a lot of her stuff as well. She didn't have any Quatermass or Doctor Who stuff. She did have one Quatermass photo actually. But I've got all of her stuff as well. And her brother just said, will you look after it? Will you have it? And unlike, some places and people, if anybody ever wants access to these things, they can have access to it for free. You know what I mean? I'm only keeping it dry. I'm not keeping it. It's not mine. I'm right.
You're not a dragon sitting atop the gold hoard. You're keeping it for a reason, so that they're there for use.
Yeah, but there's no point.
That's amazing.
There's no point me hanging on to it if it can, or keeping it to myself if it can be useful to somebody else for another project. That's the whole reason to be entrusted with it is to make sure it's available and not locked away.
So, do you have any of his materials related to the stone tape? Because from what I understand, the stone tape, I've never seen it, but is it John Deere? I think your friend John Deere. Somehow I came across something where he was talking about how important the stone tape was.
Yeah, I've got his script for the stone tape. The stone tape exists as a lovely DVD. It was actually shown on BBC4 very recently as well. The stone tape is important, and I mean, if you like Prince of Darkness, you'll like the stone tape. It's a very important piece. That's much more sort of. Well, no, it is. It has science in it, but it's that synthesis of science and folk horror. But it's an ingenious idea, and it's Nigel Neale in a nutshell. There's a brilliant bit. This is Nigel Neale over because aside from his ideas, he's very good at an apt phrase or at conjuring atmosphere. And they're in this building. They're doing these scientific experiments in this, which has a part of this building that is ancient, and turns out, death screens have been sort of recorded on the stones of the building, and so it's a haunted place. Haunted places are huge in Nigel Neale's work, and they find a Christmas card from a kid, and they're reading it, and they read it, and it says, "All I want for Christmas is please go away." And that is Nigel Neale in a nutshell, because that is terrifying, and it's just people reading a thing in a room, and that's the sort of stuff he is so good at. But I want
deeply unsettling.
Please go away. Yeah. That's terrifying. It's brilliant. The stone tape. Yeah. So I've got the script for that, and I've got some of his notes for that, I think. Yeah.
You're talking about Prince of Darkness. That movie got so under my skin. You know how there was a scene in there where people thought they were dreaming, but they were really beaming a transmission to them from the future?
Yeah.
And it was showing like basically the devil, like the silhouette of the devil. I dreamed that down to the minutest detail of, even because the camera starts panning across the bushes, and then you hear the crackly, we're broadcasting this from the year or whatever. Da, da, da. That movie got under my skin.
Well, I mean, there's a silhouette of the devil at the climax of Quatermass in the Pit. It's a Martian.
Well, there you go.
It's a Martian, but it's a horned beast. And one of Nigel Neale's lost plays that I actually adapted for BBC Radio 4, and this is what won me the favour of Judith Kerr, who was Nigel Neale's widow, because she came along to the recording, and she was delighted that we'd revisited this work, and she was happy with the job that I'd done, and that's how I ended up going to her house and interviewing her, and she was invaluable for the book, which meant that I was then, when she died, I was in touch with their son and daughter, who have continued this sort of kindness of the Neale family to me, which has been extraordinary. But it was a play called The Road, which is ostensibly about a haunting, but I'm loath to give it away, but the ending is given away on Wikipedia. If you can find, and I think it's it has been uploaded online, but by naughty people, but that's okay. I can live with it. If you don't know Nigel Neale's play The Road, look away now and go online and see if you can download the Radio 4 version of it, adapted by me, starring Mark Gatiss and Adrian Scarborough and Hattie Moran, because the ending, and I'll leave it there because I don't want to spoil it for you, Shane, but the ending is a complete upturn of what you would expect a ghost story to be, and it's extraordinary, and it's one of the best endings of anything ever. But it's
called The Road.
It's called The Road, but that also has some similarities with stuff that came after it. That are carpentry and other important American filmmakers, I think, of that have so much similarity with what Nigel Neale has done. But yeah, have a listen to The Road. It's quite amazing. So and it was just you talking about Prince of Darkness made me think of that, because it has an unexpected twist. Something you think is one thing is actually another, and what it actually is gobsmacking. And yeah, it was and that was enough to get me the commission to do it. That the guy at BBC Radio went, "Wow, why does nobody know what this is?" Because it was shown once. It was shown once in 1963.
So you wrote the radio play.
I adapted the TV
okay.
script because the TV play is lost. I adapted the
Is that what it's called, a radio play? Is that what you would call it? What would you call it?
Well, I put on the front of my script, adapted for the wireless by Toby Hadoke, but my producer didn't like that. She thought that was way too archaic. So no, it's a radio play. It's a radio play.
It is a radio play. I know there's screenplay, teleplay, and I assumed radio.
Yeah, play, adapted for the radio, but yeah, it's a radio play. It's a radio play.
The wireless.
I like the wireless, but that's
adapted for the wireless.
That's me being very, very archaic.
So what? For those out there like me, we're like, okay, I got to go check all this out now. What movie or TV versions of Quatermass are still extant? Like, what can be? Yeah. What can I find out there to watch? Because most people are going to want to watch it rather than read.
Yeah, I would.
Now, I'm talking about the fiction. For the nonfiction, you got to read Toby's book.
Nonfiction, you've got to read my book. But for the fiction,
yeah.
I mean, I think my starting place would be the TV version of Quatermass in the Pit, which is available on Blu-ray as a solo thing, and it has some lovely extras. We did commentaries on every episode, a bit like the Doctor Who. We had a budget of nothing, but we knew we were only going to get one chance to do this. And also, the film negatives of the film inserts still exist, and they're 35 mil, and they look like they were made yesterday.
Nice.
There's also a box set that collects the three together, so you'll have to double up on Quatermass in the Pit, because the Blu-ray version looks amazing, and there's nothing wrong with having it twice, because the only way you can get the first two serials is, they've just been brought up. They are extras on the Hammer Films. Hammer Films have just released the films of Quatermass Experiment and Quatermass 2, and the TV serials are extra discs on those. But if you can't get those because they were limited edition and they're quite expensive, there is a box set of the 350 serials. I would do the TV serials first, but I would maybe do them backwards, because television technology advances so quickly through the 1950s that I think in order to acclimatize yourself, and there's no continuity between serials at all, really.
So they're self-contained.
So they're self-contained. Not even Quatermass is not only is he not the same actor, they're not even trying to, echo the previous performer. They just, 2 years have passed. Television's ephemeral. People are used to theatre where actors change all the time. So boom. And then I would do the films. But then there's also a 1970s revival that's just called Quatermass, also known as the Quatermass Conclusion, that was done by ITV. It was supposed to be being done by the BBC in the early 70s. They pulled out for various reasons. So it was made all on film. So it looks pretty good. It's quite dystopian. ITV called Quatermass, and that's about stone circles. It's set in a society that has gone to the dog.
So it's not a retelling.
It's not a retelling. It's Quatermass as an old man, and as society sort of collapses, they reconnect with this old scientist from the beginning of where it all started to go wrong, sort of thing. And he's looking for his granddaughter, and she's fallen in with these sort of youth cults who are making their way towards ancient stones, which contain, a signal to an alien, again, a sort of unknowable alien power out there in space. It's a lot of people found that quite disappointing. I think it's really intelligent. A lot of people read it as Nigel Neale, an older man being annoyed with young people. I think what he's doing.
Did Nigel Neale write the revival?
Yeah. Quatermass is Nigel Neale, really. He wrote it, and I think it's him going, why is there always this schism between young people and old people? What could be a science fiction reason for that? And he does that. It's probably slightly, because it was written in 1972, 73 and not made till 1979. So the sort of hippie kids in it maybe seems slightly dated at the time. It actually sort of is kind of, that doesn't really matter now watching it in 2025. There's a beautiful Blu-ray of it where it's been cleaned up very nicely, and it's intelligent. It has this weird thing, is they made it as a 4 hour long episodes serial, but it was also written to be released theatrically. It never really was, as a 135-minute film, and so the short version is perhaps a bit too short, and the long version is maybe a little bit too long, because it was neither fish nor fowl. But I really like that. And then BBC 4, when it was relatively young, and when Doctor Who just came back, so 20 years ago now, they did a remake of the Quatermass Experiment because it's lost, and they did it live, but they didn't do all 6 episodes. They did it as a sort of 1 hour, 40-minute film. So it's very, very truncated, but they did do it live. And rather, the amusing thing there is that they thought Nigel Neale would be happy because they were doing it how they'd done it, and he sort of went, "We did it live because we had to. You're mad. Yeah. Why are you doing?" And it is slightly cut. It's got some good actors in it.
You're mad.
Mark Gatiss is in it. David Tennant is in it. In fact, it's the program David Tennant was making when he discovered, or it was announced, that he was going to be Doctor Who. It's got Indira Varma in it. It's got Adrian Dunbar, and Quatermass is played by a younger Quatermass than we used to, Jason Fleming, who is very, very good, who is the son of Gordon Fleming, who directed the Doctor and the Daleks movies. I would say it's flawed, but I'm glad that it exists. But it is a compromised thing because they did it live and they don't quite pull off the ending. But it did produce a brilliantly rude letter that Nigel Neale wrote to the producer that I'm in proud possession of, and is brilliant. So Quatermass, and they did a radio series called the Quatermass Memoirs, where they tied in archive. So it's always kind of lived on a bit,
I feel like that this is like just waiting for Big Finish to start doing stuff with Quatermass.
The rights are so up in the air now because Hammer sold off bits of what they owned because Nigel Neale was a BBC staff writer sometimes and then wasn't. Nobody quite, because the BBC did actually ask me after The Road to do Quatermass on the radio, and I thought all my Christmases had come home at once, but I didn't realise that the BBC didn't know what the rights situation was, and I was sort of told, no, it can't happen. The rights are too murky. Big Finish have tried. with the best will in the world, I think we'd all love to do it, but we simply don't know what the legal situation is.
Well, and I'm not saying it's a similar situation, but wasn't there something going on at the BBC where they kept saying, oh, the rights to the Daleks are just too intricate and crazy and there's no way, and it became received wisdom. But then once somebody actually went and looked, and it really wasn't that bad.
Well, no, that was a case of they did know who the rights were held by. It was Terry Nation's old agent, the Hancocks. So it was more that negotiation had to be done rather than nobody really.
Okay, they knew who to talk.
They knew who to talk to.
With
yeah,
Quatermass, it's like, who do we even talk to?
Yeah, and even Nigel Neale's, the estate of Nigel Neale don't really. No, and we have tried. We were able to do this, but we did a couple of years ago. We did a live staged reading of all 6 episodes of the Quatermass Experiment at Alexandra Palace, where the episodes had been made. And I played this great character called James Fullerlove, who's a journalist. Mark Gatiss played Quatermass. Kevin McNally was Inspector Lomax. Alice Lowe was in it. A brilliant actor called James Swanton was the astronaut. Victor Caroon, and it had a great bunch of people in it. And David Tennant did a little voiceover for us as well. He was the narrator at the beginning, and it was probably the best experience of my entire life, because I had dreamed of playing that character since I was a little boy, on holiday in a tent, reading that script book over and over and over again. And there I was saying the lines, and I was saying them to Mark Gatiss on stage at Alexandra Palace.
Oh, good for you.
It's just a sign that if you keep dreaming, sometimes those things can happen.
Sometimes that hard work pays off. Absolutely. Good for you, man. Is there anything else you want to tell us about? I mean, I'm sold.
Oh, good.
I knew I was going to be sold because you were so excited about it. I'm glad I came in fresh, because I just wanted to hear what you had to tell me about Quatermass. So I definitely want to go check this out. One, because it sounds like really good storytelling.
It's amazing, yeah.
But 2, I want to watch it from the historical importance of it. So are there any, I guess the only other question I had about Quatermass for you, do you think that any elements of the personality of Quatermass made it into any of the Doctor Who versions?
Well, it's funny because he's played by so many different actors. The third TV Quatermass, Andre Morel, is not unlike the sort of Pertwee Doctor in the sense that he's quite clubbable. He is slightly more eccentric, if you like, than the first 2 Quatermasses, who are quite sort of, as I say, haunted and slightly dour. He's a bit more wryly amusing. Is Andre Morel's Quatermass, and he wears a bow tie. Bow ties are cool. But and as I say, you can see a lot of season 7 Doctor Who in Quatermass, and certain stories like the demons in an image of the Fendal are very Quatermassy. But the character of the Doctor, I think, is more archly eccentric, and actually more the driving force of the character of the Doctor, I think, is probably more important to Doctor Who than the character of Quatermass is to Quatermass, if you like. Quatermass is a conduit to some fertile ideas and to some storytelling. And he is an important character in the fact that he is the scientist who, as I say, is kind of sometimes responsible for it. But it's more that he then takes us to explore these really rich ideas and terrifying scenarios, and he meets lots of interesting characters along the way as well.
Well, one of the things when you were describing the feel, the essence, it's not going to be a direct one-to-one, but it really made me think of the 1950s Thing from Another World. Which of course was John Carpenter remade into The Thing and made it more Lovecraftian horror.
Yeah.
Really, The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, owes a lot to Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. When I read The Mountains of Madness, I was like, man, a lot of that made it into John Carpenter's The Thing. But that kind of, I don't know, there was a feel to, even though the original Thing from Another World movie was like a lot about the Cold War and stuff like that, it made me, I think a little bit of Quatermass made it into that.
Oh, definitely.
Based on. And if anyone's never seen the original The Thing movie that was, I think, based on I don't know if it's Matheson Thing from Another World. That's a great
John Campbell, the book of the novella Who Goes There is fabulous. If it's really visceral, it's really evocative, the way that it conjures the sort of smells and the sort of it really plays on the senses. I think the novella is really strong. It's a really good read.
Is it good? Well, the movie, The Thing, I think it's The Thing from Another World.
That's right. Yeah.
The 50s movie looks like a B movie sci-fi movie, but it's not. It transcends that, in my opinion. So I definitely recommend. But it looks on first blush as like yet another black and white, monster movie.
Yes.
So I would definitely recommend The Thing from Another World and The Thing.
Oh yes.
I watched The Thing. I watched Carpenter's The Thing way too young, and it traumatized me, man. That was some crazy. The guy that did the practical effects for John Carpenter's The Thing had a breakdown and went into the hospital while the movie was being filmed.
Was that? Yeah.
I can't remember if that's his name, but he worked so hard on it, he had a breakdown.
Yeah. It's
had to go into the hospital.
It's a phenomenal piece of work. I watched it late at night when I must have been probably 10, but my mum let me stay up and watch.
Yeah, that's about how old I was.
My mum let me stay up and watch things. It's a film I'd probably watch once a year. The Thing. I'm a big fan of it. Yeah, I really like it.
Yeah, the two scenes that really got me as a kid, because I was like, stuff like this doesn't happen in movies, was when they're giving the guy CPR compressions or whatever, and it crashes through and the dude's chest cavity has teeth.
Yeah, and then it bites his hands off. Yeah.
It's off. And the other one was the upside down head that turned into a little spider thing. Holy smokes.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
That movie, I never knew, and we're way off in tangent land, but, I never found out later that movie was considered a failure when it first came out.
I know, it's extraordinary.
It's considered a triumph now. Yeah, because it was an amazing movie. Just absolutely amazing.
And aside from, the headline stuff of the explosions and the monsters and those shock moments, it's all about character. All those characters are great. And again, we're right to be talking about it in the same breath as Quatermass, because it is an exercise in tension. It is
right.
It is escalating menace. It is paranoia. It is, how we are our own worst enemies sometimes, and what paranoia can do to us. And it's ancient forces. It's about an old spaceship being dug up. That is what Quatermass and the Pit is about. Is about an old spaceship being dug up that is a conduit to, ancient evil. It's, it's all there.
The thing, I didn't catch this as a kid. Some stuff just flies over your head, subtext. I didn't realize at the end until later, watching it as an adult and reading other people's takeaway from the movie, that you're supposed to think that, Kurt Russell and the other character, I think it's Keith David.
It is, yeah.
That one of them is the thing.
Yeah.
That never even, I thought it was just a somber ending that they've survived all this and yet they're still going to die because they're going to freeze to death, But yeah, the paranoia and the tension carries to the very end credits.
Yes, and I still, every time I watch it, I come to a different conclusion about whether, and there's all that debate about, can you see Keith David's breath? And if you can't, does that mean that's because he's one of the things and all of that? Right. And I love that. And I remember as a kid, I didn't quite, like you, the ending was sort of like, oh, why is it ended there? I want to see them. And I think there was an original plan, wasn't it, to show them being actually rescued by helicopter. But actually, that ambiguous ending.
That's a perfect ending. Oh, yeah, it's perfect ending.
Yeah, absolutely.
So good.
Absolutely.
McCready, because he was the protagonist that drove most of the action.
Yeah.
There were other protagonists, but I have a hard time thinking he's the thing, right? Just because a 10-year-old kid or whatever, it's like he's the hero of the story.
Yeah.
But he could be. That could be the tragedy of it. He could be the thing now.
Yeah.
So, But it really sounds like Quatermass is something up my alley. So I'm going to start checking it out.
Oh, good.
I did go to, is it 10 Acre Films?
Yeah.
I did go to the website, and yes, it has multiple countries that you can ship to.
Great.
So I personally think that this is an important enough book. The extra shipping is worth
Well,
it.
yes, I apologize if the extra shipping is very extra, but
No, I think that for people like you and I that see the importance in this stuff, we don't, because I'm not casually buying this. It's like, no, this is important. I want this as part of my library. That's no big deal. So, and I think there's a lot of people that think like I do. If they're outside of the UK, they won't have a problem, paying a little extra shipping. So, and I would urge people to support Toby in his Patreon, in his books. If you're in Manchester, go to his comedy. He's working hard and he's doing important stuff. He's a cool guy.
Oh, bless you.
If you like Doctor Who even a little bit, go check out his Patreon. I know a lot more about Doctor Who than the average bear. I have learned so much about Doctor Who and how the BBC worked and stuff like that off of your Happy Times and Places. Then, it's like I said, it's a steal at any level that you support the Patreon. All right, I'm going to do this, Toby. I have a thing. I always end my podcast with bad jokes.
Okay.
So these are for you, Toby.
Thanks.
Now I didn't pick out Quatermass bad jokes because I figured they'd be harder to find. So I've got some Doctor Who bad jokes.
Okay.
Yeah, also known as dad jokes, but this is the bad joke. And see, I call it the bad joke of the week, Toby, but I'm no longer a weekly show. See, I used to be on FM radio and I was weekly.
Right.
So it was the bad joke of the week.
Yeah.
Now I'm roughly monthly, but bad joke of the kind of roughly monthly doesn't have the same ring to it as bad joke of the week, right?
Sure.
So it's the bad joke of the week. It's the bad joke of the week, Toby.
Yeah.
All right. So here we go. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Did you sign the waiver against mental damages? I don't know if that'll legally hold up in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'll be able to sue you for anything that your joke might do to my synapses and mental faculties.
Okay, all right. Synapses and faculties. Which Doctor Who episode was it where a clone of himself went into his own brain?
The Invisible Enemy, the first Doctor Who story I ever watched.
That's right. Yeah, it's such a fun one. I don't think that thing looked that much like a prawn. I mean, it looked a little bit like a prawn, but
it's a little bit, but not.
That's a pretty good special effects in it, like when they're caught in the lightning storm in space and everything.
Yes, the model works gorgeous.
Yeah, and wasn't that the first canine?
It is the first canine.
I love canine.
And also the final model effect shot of all the eggs in the. In the hatchery were for years that was it was a myth that was an effects shot that had been planned to be used in a remake of Quatermass 2, but that was actually a load of old nonsense. But anyway, it all comes back to Quatermass.
It all comes back to Quatermass. What I love about when he goes inside his own brain as a clone, there's wind blowing, and it's in a brain, but it's a Gallifreyan brain. So,
absolutely. So all bets are off.
Yeah, and I can't forget to mention, I've mentioned this to you before, I kind of wish they would have called them time mongers instead of time lords, because mongers are time mongers. I wish they'd bring Gallifrey and the Time Lords back in the show, Toby. I do. I miss having Gallifrey and the Time Lords.
Well, they had the opportunity to do that, and then Chris Chibnall destroyed Gallifrey again, which seemed to be a rather odd move. But
I don't get it. What is anyway? I love. Have you read The Infinity Doctor by Lance Parkin? The Infinity
I haven't actually. My Doctor Who literature knowledge is poor.
It's so good. I think it's a way above average version of. I'm not, like the Target books would adapt Doctor Who episodes, right? This is just fiction by Lance Parkin, and it's such a treasure trove of Gallifrey and what life on Gallifrey would have been like. And it's so good. And of course it has Omega in it. So do you say Omega or Omega?
Omega.
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 Well, now that Ncuti Gatwa has, I think he says Omega, doesn't he?
Does he say Omega? Yeah.
He said, so, I mean, I think all bets are off, but it's definitely in the Three Doctors, it's Omega. And in Arc of Infinity, it's Omega. Yeah.
See, I would say
And my
omega.
son says omega, and I say it's not that, and he says, "Well, it is now. My generation say omega, so tough." So you go,
Tough.
"Okay, can't argue with that."
I don't know. That first time I heard him say omega or omega, I was like, but then again,
What are
the
you
first
doing?
time I heard a British person say aluminium, that kind of threw me too. So I love the little different. I love the differences in language. I do.
Oregano. We say oregano as well.
Oregano. Yeah. I was dating a girl who got mad at me. The dad got mad at me for how I said Caribbean instead of Caribbean, I think.
No, we say Caribbean, and
I said Caribbean. I said
Yeah.
Caribbean, and he actually got kind of mad at me. But he already didn't like me to begin with, so he was just looking for reasons to be mad.
Yeah, it's the funniest one for me is not a pronunciation one. Actually, it's more because I used to sort of joke that if America brought Doctor Who back, they'd call it the all new Doctor Who show because we call Robin Hood, but you call him Robin Hood. So the stresses are all different. It's the same. You stress the early part of the name. So we say Doctor Who, we say Robin Hood. So you'd say Robin Hood or Doctor Who. But but you don't do it with Doctor Who.
Yeah, for some reason. We say Doctor. Yeah, we don't say Doctor.
But Robin Hood is a strange one that you go in all guns blazing on the first syllable, and we go Robin Hood.
Let me think of how to say. If I said Robin Hood, I would say Robin Hood. Does that sound right or wrong?
Hood, yeah, Robin Hood. Yeah.
Does that sound wrong?
It's the tempo. Well, we'd say. So you say Robin Hood, whereas we would go Robin Hood.
Robin Hood.
So we go harder. Yeah, we go harder on the last
name,
on the last syllable. It's just it's just the metering of it. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it. I love that stuff. So
yeah,
and that, like I said, that was when I lived in the UK. It was so fascinating to me that the accents would change pretty dramatically within a short distance. So
yeah,
I thought that was interesting. So okay, here we go. Bad jokes. Yeah. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, these are bad. I have to. Okay,
that's okay. I've perpetrated many myself.
It's not as bad as Vogon poetry.
Okay,
but they're bad. All right.
Yeah.
By the way, I just rewatched. I know I'm tangenting like crazy. Was in the 80s where the BBC did a TV adaptation of Hitchhiker's Guide.
Yeah.
That still really stands up. They did a good job of that adaptation.
Yeah, they did do it because it's a hard thing to adapt. I think I like that BBC version.
I think it's superior to the movie version that came out.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
So, yeah. Okay. Here we go. All right. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Doctor.
Doctor Who.
Oh, I see you know this one.
Yes, that was my favorite joke as a kid. Although we would say knock, knock. Who's there? Doctor Who. You just said it. That was.
You just said it.
Yeah.
All right.
You just said it. Yeah.
All right. Why did the Dalek cross the road?
Don't know. Why did the Dalek cross them?
To exterminate humanity.
Fair.
Yeah, to exterminate. You know what one of my favorite scenes in quote unquote New Who is when the Daleks and the Cybermen talk smack to each other.
Yeah, that's right, when they give each other attitude.
Yeah, I love that so much. And then the Cybermen are like, well, hey, let's be allies. And the Daleks are like, we don't need you.
Yeah.
All right. The only thing you're superior at is dying. All right.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite Doctor Who moments. So
it's very good because you expected them to ally themselves, actually. Right. You expected, this is what we've been waiting for, Daleks. And the Dalek just goes, no way. We don't need you.
Yeah, you're terrible. Yeah, you're terrible. So, okay, why did the Sontaran cross the road?
Don't know.
It was a tactical move to confuse the chicken.
Because the chicken was a Rutan that had shapeshifted.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. I actually love Sontarans. I love the potatoes very much.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Yeah, I'm a big Sontaran fan. Okay, here's the next one. So a silence walks into, I forget the rest.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good.
You like that? Okay.
Yeah,
and here's the last one. We're reaching into what I consider the classic era of New Who with this one, if there is such a thing. Why did the face of Bo attend the party alone?
It's something to do with You Are Not Alone, but I can't quite work out what.
Actually, that's a good guess, but it's because he had no body to go with.
Oh, no body to. I was led down again because he says you are not alone.
Right,
Yeah,
you are not alone.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, your
good.
Doctor Who trivia knowledge worked against you on that one.
Sometimes you can have too much knowledge. Yes.
So, do you think that Jack Harkness is the great face of Bo?
I choose to ignore that bit because I think it's stupid.
Kind of dumb. We all have those moments. We just self-edit, right? We're like, no, I don't accept that.
Yeah. My friend texted me after that and said, I thought it was called The Face of Bo because it was a great big face, which is kind of fair comment.
Right. Yeah. I miss, early Doctor Who set up all, you had The Face of Bo, you had all this other stuff going on, and then it just kind of went away. But, in 20 years, you're going to change your background character.
Oh, it's been quite a ride.
Yeah.
I I'm from a time when the idea that it would ever come back seemed like a pipe dream. So,
man, it has been tremendously fun, and we've talked for almost 3 hours, and it doesn't feel like it. So,
well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about things I like. It's nice.
Yeah. Well, I hope it doesn't feel like it's been a long 3 hours for you. It felt like it
not
went
at
really
all.
quick, so
it's flown by.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You have a golden ticket. You have a Willy Wonka golden ticket back onto Shane Plays Geek Talk whenever you want. Just let me know.
Yeah, we've got to do the Doctor Who talk, haven't we?
Doctor Who. Yeah. Well, how is it I'm supposed to say it? Doctor Who.
Doctor Who.
No, yeah. Doctor Who.
Doctor. Well, Doctor Who.
Doctor Who.
It's such a great name, isn't it?
Doctor Who.
And now on BBC One, the Daleks arrive in Doctor Who.
Doctor Who.
I sometimes on the radio I get to read the credits for the Big Finish Doctor Who's because I present a Radio 4 Extra, and it's a dream come true. And I say, in Curse of the Daleks, Doctor Who was played. No, I have to say the Doctor, unfortunately. But sometimes I get to do the trailers, and say, and coming up tonight on Radio 4 Extra, Paul McGann is Doctor Who, and it's just great.
Yeah,
that's what I used to dream of doing as a kid, just saying Doctor Who.
All right, man. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate having the time, or thanks for the time, taking the time, and keep doing what you're doing, man. It makes my life better.
Oh, thanks. That's very kind. Well, I appreciate your support and your kindness. Thank you.
You're welcome. Everybody else, we will catch you next time on Shane Plays. Thanks so much for listening to Shane Plays Geek Talk. I certainly hope you enjoyed this journey into the things we love. For your convenience, show notes with helpful links for each episode can always be found at shaneplays.com. You can catch the podcast in several places, including on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, Verbal, YouTube, and more. If you like what you hear and would like to support Shane Plays Geek Talk, you can do so for as little as $1 per episode on Patreon at patreon.com/ShanePlays. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay geeky, my friends.